All right, ETM Hotep. Dua for tuning in. For those who are tuning in live or will be tuning in live, and for those who will be watching the archive, welcome. And you're hanging out with the Seshew Netcher on Divine Words Wednesday. Today is Wednesday, and this is our Divine Words Wednesday. And on Divine Words Wednesdays, you know, our previous shows, we've been emphasizing the method of transliteration and translating. And within the method, there's 4 steps, and we've been emphasizing those 4 steps, detailing those 4 steps, you know, just going over it step by step. And these sessions or hangouts, they're not meant to be, you know, a detailed class on how to transliterate or translate, but we're basically just demonstrating the steps for those who are already a little familiar. And even if you're, you know, it's your first time seeing them or you're just interested in learning, you know, we let you know where you can learn as far as the classes that are available, and but there's some prerequisite information that you would have learned prior to coming to this point of transliterating, translating. So we're basically demonstrating the fact that the translations, it could be done first, and then we just demonstrate the steps on how to do it. So tonight we'll just jump in, you know. We have a particular picture that's been floating around the internet for a while as far as just the imagery, the image of the picture. So we're going to just jump into it. But prior to us jumping into it, let's, you know, once you all introduce yourselves and let people know who we have chiming in.
Hotep, ETM Hotep, welcome and peace, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. This is Brother June, representing from the Pacific Northwest. Hope you guys enjoy the show and leave satisfied. Hotep.
ETM Hotep, welcome to the viewing audience, and my name is Atiba. Peace to the family.
Peace, family. This is Kofi Pasai. Hope you enjoy the show.
Sleep is for the weak. Sleep is for the weak. We have the grand intro. All right, who we have next?
Yeah, it's Brother Chris, member of the Seshew. Welcome to the show. Hope y'all enjoy.
Welcome to all the people. This is Damien. Hope you enjoy the show. Welcome.
Hotep, this is Tonika, and welcome.
All right. Anybody left? Anybody else? No? All right. So, but before we jump into, you know, the demonstration, and I hope everyone is benefiting from this. You know, like I said, we do this and showing 3 things. One is to demonstrate that it can be done. You know, the fact that we're doing it, and you know, that kind of addressed the minority of people, or the minor number of people who feel that the hieroglyphs are not deciphered or not translated. You know, you won't sit there and tell someone who's actually playing basketball or someone who's sitting down playing the piano, you're not going to walk up to them and say, there's nobody playing the piano or there's nobody playing basketball, when you're talking to someone who's actually doing it. So as a Seshew mdw-nTr, we're demonstrating the fact that it can be done, and we're actually doing it. So there's no one that can come up to any of us and say that no one, or the glyphs are not deciphered, or these pictures and these hieroglyphs or signs are undecipherable or not translated. You know, you can't do that with us, at least. But there are people out there that have that opinion, and you know, everyone that I've personally experienced that have that opinion, and it's not that many people that have that opinion, but those that do, that have that opinion and even similar opinions. 100% of the time, there is people that have never studied the language. All right, they've never done any in-depth study of the language. You know, they may be familiar with a few things that anybody will find on the internet, but no study of it. You know, there's a difference between, you know, studying something, researching, studying, and applying rigor to your study and you know, proper research methods and things from just perusing information, skimming through information. You know, that's the difference between what some people will call a microwave scholar or a microwave researcher versus an actual student of these different issues. So for us, we take it serious, and for us, we actually dive into the language to the point where we can explain a lot of different elements, and we're still you know, learning. This language is definitely there's a lot involved with the language, and I always like to break it down. I always like to break the learning process down into 3 different levels with several different stages per level. And so even after someone will learn the foundational level, which will be a beginner's level of laying the foundation, knowing the history of the language, how long the scripts have been in existence, you know, straightening out the what has been said as the different stages of the language, and so on and so forth. Once you get all of that information down and you're able to know how the language works in terms of know what a phoneme is versus an excuse me, not a phoneme, but a phonogram versus ideogram versus determinatives or classifiers, and identifying signs and things like that. That's a foundation, and that you have to have that real good solid foundation. And then from there you tap into the grammar, which consists of syntax and morphology. All right, and in the fall, this coming fall, I'll be offering a class, starting a class for the first time, dealing with grammar, and it will be after the publication of the grammar book. All right, so that's 2 stages of still this first level of learning, and then from there, learning some basics about linguistics, which will give people the tools and this knowledge of how languages work in general, and then especially more focus on the historical comparative method. Okay, and that will provide the tools to compare languages and what are the means of doing so and why. You know, so that will be like the 3 stages of level 1. But there's still more. On level 2 is where you get into finding out the realities behind the different inscriptions and text and words that you are now able to recognize and know and to look up. But now you will have to go through learning phases and practicing, getting to the realities behind the different inscriptions. And the reason why that is because, as a lot of people should know, is in ancient times, especially on the continent of Africa, and it's probably true for a lot of indigenous cultures, period, because you're going from oral traditions to written, documented traditions. But the method of documentation, whether it was orally, you know, oral transmission or written, was done in using figurative language. Okay, and with figurative language, you have metaphors, allegories, you know, narratives that we call mythos, and things like that, or symbolisms. And we understand that metaphors or symbolisms, they're stand-ins for a reality. So it's not the reality itself, but it's a stand-in. It's a way of packaging information to make it transferable or transmittable. Okay, so a lot of things that we're reading, you have to actually look behind or pierce the veil and dig into the realities behind the different figure of speech and everything. So this is where a lot of people will get their interpretations from. So you're reading it, and you have a literal translation of what the word represents in the lexical inventory of the language, but then how it's used and the realities behind it, that will be an entire study, you know, and that particular study is broken up into 3 stages as well. And then on top of that, that would be level 2, and on top of that, level 3 would be where you take all of the previous levels, level 1 and 2, and you can survey everything that you know and that you learn, and then find out what's applicable in your life personally, in your community, in your family, and then, you know, in a broader sense, socially, what can we all apply and take from this, and how can we improve on it, or should we improve on it? Should we use it? Should it be tossed, and whatnot? So, and that's a whole nother level, and that's a whole study. That's where you get into the application. Everything becomes, you know, applied, actionable. So it's a lot to learn, and right now we're only dealing with level 1, the ground level, stage 1. So stage 1, level 1. All right, so we're just at the beginning, you know. And I say all that to say is that what we're doing and what we demonstrate on Wednesdays is to just let people know that this can be done, it's being done, and that there's a lot more to be done, you know. And we plan on going all the way with it. All right, so with that said, you know, I don't know if you all want to just jump into the inscription, or anybody have any comments or anything to say from last week till this week. Anybody come in touch with any information that's you know, related to our topic for tonight? No? All right. I'll take the silence. It's just like class. I'll take the silence as a no. But all right, so let's just. Oh, you had something to say?
Yeah, I was trying to unmute my mic, but no, I appreciate what you said, and um, we had you know, you asked that question in our Facebook group. You know, why should we learn this? What are the benefits? And you know, we got a lot of replies from people, and I appreciate that. You know, some of them simple as, you know, so we don't have to rely on anyone else to tell us what it says. Um, you know, so we can get back to where we were, stuff like that. But man, I really appreciate even coming across this information and learning the language, and it's done a lot for me. And I just feel like my reply, we can learn the language, and then we can get a better understanding of the mentality and genius of the ancient Remech. You know, and I feel that learning this has personally changed my lives. So, you know, it might do the same for other people, and if we can, you know, it can really go a long way. A lot of people might ask me, you know, people have asked me, you know, why are you studying that? What are you, you know, learning? Are you think you're going to change anything? You know, and I feel like what we're doing right here might not feel like immediate change is happening, but I'm sure that we're laying a solid foundation, you know, to something big. And you know, I just encourage my friends and people that I talk to try and get in it. So yeah, I just appreciate what you just said right there, because it is important.
But hey, what you just said, it goes hand in hand with the class that just started. I just started a new class group yesterday, last night, and we had an orientation, and every first class or orientation, I always ask people to share why, you know, tell us why they want to learn a language, or if they already had experience with the language, what has that experience been, and things like that. And pretty much everyone has similar answers, you know, similar responses to it. And it goes into what you just said. And it's something that I put in the introduction to the book, where something that's very basic and just common sense is that, you know, and this goes for any language that people are learning, or any culture that you're studying, whether you're studying it and whether you're studying it just to learn about it, or you're studying it to get into the culture, for that to be your culture. So that could be your aquarium that you swim around in that you determine your place in on the global stage and your compass. Either way, in order to fully understand a culture, you have to learn its language. So I know a lot of people are recognizing that, and they see that the benefit of that is nothing but benefits in doing that, because if you don't, then you run the risk of misinterpreting the culture. And like you said, you have to rely on other people telling you about the culture that you yourself are attempting to put into practice. You know, so it's of nothing but beneficial to learn the language of any culture or tradition or people that a person is studying, or that resonates with them and they want to become a part of, or whatever the case is. And that goes for people who practice the Abrahamic belief systems of Judaism, whether they're Hebrew Israelite or Hebrew. They should learn Hebrew so they can read the scriptures or the texts that are related to that particular culture and tradition. Same thing with Christianity and Islam. If you want to be a practicing Muslim, then it's to your benefit to learn Arabic, so you can read the Quran in Arabic, because the culture is transmitted in that language, the Arabic language. So the Egyptian culture is transmitted in the Egyptian language, and this goes for all cultures. So if you want a direct connect with that particular culture, then you have to tap in and jump in the river of the language. All right, so, and that should be pretty common sense to everyone, and that's been the motivation for a lot of people to learn the ancient Egyptian language. Those who are curious about Kemet or Egypt, they want to go beyond the romanticism, beyond the commercialization of Egypt, in the movies and things like that. Once you get beyond that, then you'll find that, hey, what I'm finding, a lot of people are like, hey, I need to learn a language if I want to get going, any further with that. So that's good. And then another thing you said, if people ask you why are you learning a language, what is it doing for you? Learning a language is not stopping brutality. Learning a language is not putting food or money, in the children's mouths, or food on your table, clothes on their back, and so on and so forth. And I say this before, I say this a lot when I hear that, because I've seen it, and I've seen people say that, and not just with the Egyptian language or Rani Kemet, but with other things. And when people do that, they're mismatching two issues together, and that comparison is just really nonsensical. It doesn't make any sense. It's like they're forcing the pairing up of two things to be compared. It's like, baseball. I can't even say that, because I was about to say baseball and basketball, but at least those two things are sports. But it's like, I don't know. It's just comparing two different things, and then placing an importance on one and then to shun the other. When we can walk and chew gum at the same time. So, if we learn how to speak English very well, or we learn how to speak Spanish, or learn French very well, then the same thing could be said about anything. As in terms of, is that putting food on your table? Will that stop police brutality? Whatever. So we need to kind of get away from those kinds of comparisons that they don't have any merit. But all right, so with that said, we could jump into this inscription, and then also we have the chat open on the YouTube page. So I see we have actually we have Sister Lisa, my brother Sean, and Jehuti Ma'at already chiming in. All right, so let me put the picture up. Maybe we can get somebody that's watching to break it all the way down for us. How about that? All right, so this picture. This is the.
Man, we've done enough shows. I said we done enough shows to demonstrate the procedure and the methods.
Mm-hmm. All right, so this is the picture that we are dealing with today. All right, can you see it? Is it up on the screen? Is it on the screen?
Sure.
All right. Okay, so now usually we'll I will have some slides to present to kind of have to show the different steps in a more detailed way. But now we're just going to jump straight into this inscription, similar to how we do on Freestyle Fridays, except Freestyle Fridays we don't use the sign list, we don't use dictionaries. All right, but for today we are going to use the sign list, and we're going to consult the dictionaries. And that's another thing, because Brother June, you said something earlier. If you don't learn a language, you have to rely on what people tell you that these texts are saying and meaning. And some people say the same thing for those who even still learn the language, and they'll say something along the lines of, well, even though you know the language, you're still using dictionaries written by Europeans or European Egyptologists. You're still using grammar books from European grammars and things like that. And that's said and used to in opposition of someone learning and demonstrating the fact that they can actually read Seshew. So one, I feel I've seen people make comments like that and say things like that. But again, just like people who say that the signs have not been deciphered or translated at all, those people who are not in that group but in the other group that will say things like I just said, those people are not skilled or proficient or competent in the language either. Because if they were, then they will understand that we don't rely on the dictionaries. We have other tools now available to us by way of African scholars and the works of African scholars and African linguists who have done comparisons between the Egyptian languages and living African languages that are still spoken today. And that tool is the historical comparative method. So whenever we're in doubt with a dictionary definition, then we have other tools available to us. So in other words, we don't have to rely on those dictionaries. We don't have to rely on the grammars either. So, but it would take someone who's actually studying, who's actually putting in the work, who's actually putting rigor and time into the study, actually being a student of the language, that will know that all of these other tools are available. It's like someone building a house and today in 2016, but they're still using a hammer, to drive in nails, and not knowing that a what do you call it, a air nail gun that uses the compressed air, that those are available. So they're still hammering with a hammer, whereas another person comes along and they got a nail gun. All right, so now we have tools available to us that some people may not be aware of, so we have to all keep that in mind. I just want to let that be known, because it's past time for us to start to stop. I see it as making excuses for some people, but it's past time for us to stop making those excuses and to embrace our African scholars who are putting in this hard work, and are showing and improving. And a lot of work from African scholars is written in a foreign language, and the predominant language that it's written in is in French. So, which means that for us to keep up, then we need to take up French. There's no way of getting around it. We need to take up French, or at the very least, find somebody else that knows French that can help you out with the information. But there's a lot of scholarship out there. There's a lot of scholarship out there coming from the continent in French or in the mother tongue of the particular scholar themselves. All right, so because of that, that's not a reason for us to turn a blind eye to the scholarship. All right. Okay, so this picture, okay, if y'all can see it, you can see my cursor. All right, well, first of all, when you first look at a picture, what are some of the things that stand out on this picture? Well, first of all, I can see that it's a papyrus, and it's written in simplified Seshew nTr. Now, Egyptologists will call this cursive hieroglyphs, but there's nothing cursive about it, in our sense and what we know cursive to be. Okay, so we prefer to call it simplified Seshew nTr because that's exactly what it is. Seshew nTr being hieroglyphs, being the formal carving of the different pictorial signs or glyphs. This is simply the same thing, but with ink, and it's more simplified. So you don't find that fine detail that you will have in larger carved images, but it's here in pen form, and it's just more simplified. But you can see every single sign and glyph has a Seshew nTr counterpart that's a bit more detailed. Okay, so this is why we prefer to call it that, and not cursive hieroglyphs. But okay, so what are some of the things that stand out in this picture? Anybody want to chime in?
Sean P in the chat said the deity's on the boat. He said, Sean P said this is a passage of some sort, right?
Oh, well, see, that's the thing. Whenever you see images and figures in pictures and everything, usually and you see inscriptions around those pictures and figures, then it's best to deal with the inscriptions and the pictures together. So I wouldn't go as far as to say anything about the pictures too far until you deal with the inscriptions. And I only say that because a lot of people will do that and make the mistake of just dealing with the pictures. And they'll say, well, wait a minute, these are light bulbs. The Egyptians had electricity and they were using light bulbs, or the Egyptians were flying in special crafts and things like that. Or look at this, here's a alien on the wall in a temple of so-and-so, not even reading the inscriptions to know that it's not what looks like an alien is actually an unblossomed lotus plant, with the lotus seeds looking like the eyes and things like that. But if they read the inscription, it would simply tell you that this is a presentation or a gift, an offering of a beautiful lotus flower or water lily, etc. So I'm just saying that to emphasize that whenever you see inscriptions or text near the different figures inside of the images, you can never separate the two. Never ever separate the two. All right, that's a marriage that's undivorceable. All right, we all have to keep that in mind. Definitely have to keep that in mind. But so when I ask, anything stand out, not to go far as to interpret what's what. It's just the things that actually stand out. So
I try and look at the signs. Most of the pictures they have the signs. So we see what looks like the sun. I think that's N5.
You mean the big one in the middle?
Yeah.
Okay.
Underneath that, Kepler, the beetle. That's another sign. I forgot that code. Then the boat. So I just look around. Even how the arms on the man are situated. So that's what I'd like to do.
Okay. All right. Well, what sticks out? Anybody else? No. All right. Well, I noticed, in the picture, what sticks out as well is we have someone looks like they are hanging upside down from the ceiling, what would be a ceiling. It looked like they're supporting someone else hanging upside down, like reaching for something. That's, at first glance, this is what you'll see: somebody hanging upside down, reaching and supporting someone. All right, and that's pretty much it. It's not too much going on in the picture. Everyone is looking to the right, and then obviously I don't think we mentioned it, but we see the boat. You mentioned the boat, but it's being held up by someone. There's a figure holding the boat up. All right, so now, some people may even look at this picture and say, there were giants in Egypt. Egypt believed in giants, because here this figure is on the bottom, is bigger than the figure that's inside the boat, and he's big enough to hold the boat up in the air. So, and that may sound funny, but it's not far-fetched from the things that you see on the internet. You will definitely see things where people will come to those kind of conclusions. And say that giants, and try to tie it into Genesis chapter 6 in the Bible with the Nephilims, the sons of God, being giants in the earth, and so on and so forth. I've seen all kinds of things like that, and that's just totally unscientific, and it's just totally abandoning, the culture, the Kemetic culture, and just particular in this specific instant, the inscription. So that kind of speaks to one of the benefits. Earlier we were talking about benefits of learning the language. The benefit of learning the language is to eliminate the guesswork, speculation, the far-fetched speculation. Come closer to what's really going on. What was the intended meaning? What was documented? What was actually documented? What was trying to be conveyed? But all right, so now on Divine Words Wednesdays, we go over the 4 steps, and those 4 steps are 1, to determine the direction in which the signs are to be read, and step 2 is to identify each and every sign, all right, or glyph. And with step 2, we are that's a data collecting step. You're trying to get the transliteration of the individual glyphs. You are obtaining their Gardner code numbers, and then you want to determine the possibilities of how a specific sign can function within any given word. That's step 2. Step 3 is to group those signs into words. All right, and then you take those words that the signs form, and then you look up those words inside of a dictionary. And then step 4 is to take all of that and then come up with a sensible translation. And between step 3 and step 4 is where knowledge of grammar will come into play, because we are in a translation. We have to remember, transliterating is simply taking one script and bringing it into a new script. So a source script and bringing it into a target script. But when you're translating, you're bringing a source language into a target language. So the source language and the grammar, or the rules that govern it, may be different than the grammar that governs the target language that you're translating to. So in our case, it would be coming from Ancient Kemet grammar into English grammar, and they're not identical. There are a lot of there are things that are similar, and that are an element of pretty much many languages together, but then there are some differences. So we have to take all those differences in account when we go from step 3 to step 4. So when I say come up with a sensible translation, that's what we mean, to make it make sense in English. All right, so in step 1, anybody want to explain step 1 for this particular piece? Just I guess answer step 1, and how is that derived?
They already beat us to it in the chat. Who's that? Sean Pete. I agree with him. He got vertical right to left.
Okay. All right. So why? Why is that?
Like we discussed in other shows, looking at common signs or the birds or animals, you see which way they're facing, So you want to talk into the glyphs, facing the glyphs. So if the animals and people, everything in every column is going to the right, you want to read from right to left.
All right, good enough. And you know, and like like you said, we've been doing enough shows where people will know. But those who are watching this for the first time, um, that's why I would like to point it out. You know why? So the birds are pretty much the easiest. The birds are the first for step one. This is for step one. For step one, if there are a lot of birds or birds, period, in the piece that you're dealing with, then that will be your key clue to accomplish step one. So as we can see, if you can see my cursor, we have like in this first column, we have a bird here is facing to the right. We even have a mummy here facing to the right. This bird here is facing to the right. This seated figure is facing to the right. But the birds will definitely be first up, you know, because there's so many birds, and then the birds have a specific direction. All right, so, and you can see this bird here, here. I probably skipped a few here. Okay, so that covers step one. So yeah, vertical, left to right. Now I do want to say that with
There you go. You mean right to left?
what I say.
I think you said left to right.
Oh, okay, yeah. Forgive me. Yeah, definitely. Vertical, right to left. I guess I'm getting ahead of myself because what I was about to say is that with step one, now step one, it's a general rule, but it's not 100% of the time because there is a such thing as retrograde inscriptions. And there's a couple of forms of retrograde. You have retrograde where, and retrograde simply means to go against or go backwards. So in normal circumstances, and most of the time, you will always read into the signs because, you know, as we always say, we don't talk to the back of heads of people when we talking to people. We talk to their face. So you speak or you read these glyphs as though you're facing them. So you're going to read into the glyphs, but that's not 100% true all the time. There are cases where you will have to read. Well, let me say this. There's a form of retrograde that is columnar retrograde, where they're like, for example, if this was retrograde, I'll use this picture here. So we understand that these are in columns. And for this particular one, we're going to read from right to left. So we're going to start over here and then work our way to the left. But even within the column, we can see that it is also from right to left, even within the column. Okay, now if this was retrograde, one form of it, when I said column retrograde, where the glyphs will face to the right and they'll be arranged within the column from right to left, but you're going to actually read backwards as far as the columns are concerned. And for example, in the Peret and Heru of Anhay, and I believe we've done this on a Divine Words Wednesday. If not, then maybe, you know, we'll definitely pull one up to share just to illustrate what I'm talking about. But even though the glyphs are facing to the right, and you would think that you read from right to left, but you will actually read from left to right per column, even though the glyphs within them are arranged from right to left, even within it. So, for example, this says, let's just take this first word in the second column. This word is Seshew. Now, even if this was retrograde coming this way, I would still read it as Seshew, which means this folded cloth would still be the first sign that I come to within this column. But it's just that I'm reading the columns from left to right. So the columns would be retrograde and not the signs themselves, not the individual signs. So I hope that makes sense. But let me just say it again. So we have the individual signs that could still be written from right to left, but in retrograde, in column retrograde, and you'll find this in the papyrus of Anhay and then in elsewhere as well. you may have to read the columns from left to right, although you're reading the glyphs from right to left within each column. Okay, so we'll be able to explain that more, I guess, when we show one that actually does that.
Yeah, me and Antoine are working on one right now. It's plate 9.
Okay, well, yeah. So maybe we can show that for next Wednesday.
Yeah.
All right, that'll be good. Okay, so that's step 1. So step 2. Now there's a lot of glyphs here. So step 2, for the sake of time, we're not gonna identify every single glyph. So maybe there's some glyphs that we could just point out. If anybody want to just point out some glyphs, and
Yeah.
code or how to look
Well,
at.
the easy ones that people should know are like the what do you call them, monoliterals. So and I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with the first sign from right to left. On the top is the Netcher sign. See the deity behind that. I'm pretty sure people are familiar with that. And then jumping back to the right sign, it's that's the simplified quail chick. It looks like a 9. Yeah, right there. That's a simplified quail chick, transliterated W. And then to the left of that is a monoliteral. It's at Q3. Q3, the stool. Another monoliteral underneath that is the pool, N37. And then another monoliteral under that, which is the bread loaf, X1. So yeah, knowing your monoliterals will it'll always help you out.
Yeah, and by the time anyone makes attempts to transliterate and translate, they should have the monoliterals memorized. And the monoliterals are 24 in number, with a 25th, I guess a pseudo 25th being the double read, but as independent signs is 24, but there's 25 represent 25 sounds within Rodney Kemet or the Egyptian language. All right, so, and that's not hard to memorize. You have to memorize the sign how it looks, which is easy, but then you just have to memorize the Gardner code and how it can function. Well, monoliteral, they're phonograms. So memorizing the Gardner code and what it is and things like that is something that you should definitely have memorized. But the key thing to know is how it is transliterated and the Gardner code. Those two things. That's 2 pieces of information that you memorize along with knowing it on sight. All right, and like I said, there's 24 individual signs, but the 25th being that double read. All right. Okay, so that will be step 2. Now, just to identify a couple more signs. Now we have the vulture over here. We see the beetle here that kind of sticks out. In this, we have the folded cloth. I saw a couple of them, and now I'm looking for here in the folded cloth we have horn viper. We have the arms and shield here at the bottom. We have the hand. We have a twisted flax here. We have the sky with lightning or some kind of action of the sky here. And by the way, right here at the top of this inscription, the very top, and you can see it cuts off on the right hand side, but over here you can tell what it is. This is the word for pet, or for sky or heaven. Okay, now the other side is kind of cut off, so it may have extended further, but you can see the end here where it has a little part that comes down That's the word for sky, and it's the word pet. And so when I said earlier that this figure is you know, like hanging from the ceiling, this ceiling happens to be the sky, you know. So just kind of keep that in mind. All right, but this particular sign right here is the same sign you see right here. I hope you can see my cursor, but this sign right here is the same thing, pet. All right. Anybody else have anything for step 2? No. All right. Did somebody say Anunnaki? Wow. Yeah. Okay. So now step 3. So step 2, you will walk through the entire inscription and identify every sign. Now, obviously, you know, the more you memorize and can go from memory, the faster you will get at doing this. So even your very first inscription, you should already have memorized the monoliterals, and that's what Brother June, you were saying earlier. But then even as you put this into practice, you'll start to memorize more than just the monoliterals. You'll start to memorize biliterals and triliterals. And by the way, monoliterals are so called because they represent a single consonant. So therefore, uniliteral, uni meaning one, or monoliteral, mono meaning one. Biliteral is exactly what it says. Bi is 2, so it represents 2 consonants. And triliteral is 3. Tri is 3, and it represents 3 consonants. So, and there's many more biliterals and triliterals than there are monoliterals. Like I said, there's only 24 monoliterals. I should say 25. Represent 25 sounds. So having that memorized, then when you actually sit down and practice transliterating and translating, then you'll start to memorize more of the other signs. Okay. And one of the big things that, you know, you should memorize along with the monoliterals, or with equal importance, are the determinatives, because the determinatives is the main thing that helps out with the next step that we get into, which is step 3. Step 3 is when you group the signs into words. Okay, and the reason why we even say that is because in Seshew, as you can see, there's no spacing like how we have in English or other languages, that when we write or type in, we put spaces in between words. So the space is the delimiter between words. But in Seshew, there is no such thing. So what would be the closest equivalent to that, so to speak, would be determinatives or classifiers. All right, and these are signs. Determinatives are signs that are not transliterated and they're not pronounced, but they provide a semantic meaning to the word. It lets us know what category the word falls in, and it narrows our focus on what the word can mean. All right, so and you know, that's when you get into classification. That's why some people may refer to them as determinatives, because that's what it does. That's what it helps us to do. It helps us to determine the meaning of the word. So therefore, it took on the name determinative. But it also functions as a classifier, because it classifies nouns into different groups. Okay, and then, you know, you can see the semantic scope of these different words that share the same determinative, or the same glyph that's being called determinative. All right. So so just to explain a little further, if you were to look in the Vigus dictionary, because the Vigus dictionary, Mark Vigus dictionary, it's arranged the way that the dictionary is arranged, and the order that it's arranged in. It's arranged based on the Gardner codes. So if you were to look into the Vigus dictionary and you were to look at the words that that end with, let's just say, the N5, which is the circle with the dot in the middle, and you look at all the words that have that as its last sign, which means it's functioning as a determinative or as a classifier, then you're going to see the semantic range of all of those words where they kind of fit into a class or a category of words. They're not all going to mean the same thing, but they will have a common theme that you can pretty much recognize. All right, so that's what the determinatives do in their function as classifiers. All right, so just keep that in mind. All right, so now on to step 3. So step 3, grouping the words together, and I believe for the sake of time, let me go back to the page. I'll take the focus off of my screen, and I believe we have the okay. So Natiba, I'm sharing your screen now, where the different columns are actually grouped. So this will represent step 3. So what you're looking at, I have the focus on. Hopefully you can see that. Let me make sure. Okay, good, perfect. So this is how the signs will be grouped, and now when you look at the signs here, they're one right after another, or they're on top of each other, and so on and so forth. But if you look at the transliteration there, the groupings are represented by the spaces. All right, now you don't see spaces in the actual Seshew or Netcher, but in the transliteration, we space them out because it allows us to group these signs into words, and then the words are the things that we use to look up. All right, so for this first particular column, Atiba, you want to kind of speak on this, or anybody else want to speak on this in terms of step 3, grouping? No? All right. So, okay, on the screen we have the words. Oh, I see somebody open the mic up. Who's that?
Yeah. I thought it was on. My bad. I was gonna say, like you said, learning the determinative will help with the group, and the first 2 signs, we see a seated man, which is usually a determinative. So that might help with grouping the first word, which we have as Netcher.
Okay. Yep. So, all right, let's do this. In this first line right here, let's point out some determinatives then. So you already mentioned one, the seated, curved, bearded man, which will be a determinative. So that's now this is not a 100% rule, because that seated, bearded, curved man is sometimes used as a suffix pronoun as well. But these are clues that lead you to, the proper groupings and things like that. So that's why we say determinatives help. It's one of the biggest helpers in dealing with step 3, grouping these things together. But in this case, it is a determinative. So you already mentioned the first one. And so what will be the next one as a determinative that sticks out?
Well, the next one, I'll go with the papyrus roll. That's a common determinative I see a lot right there.
Okay, yep, and we see, and there's 2 of them in this particular column. All right. So we have the papyrus roll, which is a determinative, and then we've come across the brazier, which is this flame. It may not look like a flame, but that's what it, particularly represents. Which is next to the fish, to the right of the fish, and the water ripple under it. Because I can't use the cursor for this. So, okay, yeah, I can see your cursor. Yeah, so that will be a determinative. And then that is pretty much it. That's pretty much it. Now, in this column, you see that on the far right, the last glyph at the top, which is the mouth, the open mouth. Now, that would be a monoliteral, so that would be easily recognized, and what's under it, which is the horned viper. But now we see this single stroke up under the mouth. Now, there's a little bit of confusion with that, because some people are told that when you see that single stroke under a sign, then you're supposed to take the sign literally. or what you see is what you get. You know, WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get. So therefore, if it's a mouth, then that's what it is. Now, that's true in some cases, but it's not always true. It's better to explain it and to teach it as a logographic indicator or marker, which means logogram is a combination of two words, logos and gram, which means logos meaning word, comes from the Greek logos. So logo meaning word, and then gram, which means to write or something written. So we have logograms, which are word writings. So this particular sign is telling us that this sign is to be taken as a full word, not necessarily what the picture is. Okay, and I want to emphasize that, because that's pretty much true in all cases. But if you go with what you see is what you get, and that, you know, when the stroke is under a particular sign, then that is what it is, then you can be wrong. All right, and in this particular case, that is the case. That is the case where this particular sign, the word and the sign match, because the word is ra, and the word for mouth is ra, and that's what we're looking at, mouth. Okay, but I don't see it in here, but just to give you an example of the other way and how you could be wrong is when you see this single stroke under the glyph for heart, the heart glyph. And is there anyone in here? Yeah, I don't see one in here, but you know, in a lot of inscriptions, you'll see this heart, the heart glyph, which is pretty familiar to a lot of people. But you'll see the stroke under it, and a lot of times it's not talking about the heart, because if we were to follow what you see is what you get, then you're supposed to interpret it according to that. You're supposed to interpret it as the heart, the heart, the heart. But it's not. So this is why I say it's a logographic marker, which means that it is, the word is, it's a full word, and the word is ib, and that word can mean essence, it can mean the mind, it can mean the inner parts of something, you know, all, you know, those kinds of things, not the heart, not the organ, not the heart pumping, blood pumping organ of the heart. All right, so I just want to give those two examples, and why we say what we say versus what some people may find in some other places, in some books. All right, so there's like a little bit of confusion with that. So hopefully that'll clear that up. But so here we have the words grouped together. So June, you wanted to finish, or you had something else to say?
Well, I was just thinking when you were saying that that word is raw, how you know, like you always say, these pronunciations that we're using, what is it, a convention?
Mm-hmm.
We realize that it might not have been that that sound, or, you know, historically, but work is ongoing with you know, addressing the, you know, proper historical sounds.
Mm-hmm.
So you can say it better than I can, but I was just gonna add that.
No, you said it. I mean, you said it, and this is something that's no secret. Even by early Egyptologists, you know, they fully disclose that within their books and things like that, where they will say that the pronunciations are only conventional, and it's only done. They had you know, they had to, because they had to find a way to pronounce and talk about the words. You know, you can't talk about a language if things are unpronounceable. You know, if you can't even, you know, pronounce anything. So, and the reason why all this is an issue in the first place is because in Seshew Netcher or the hieroglyphs, there's no documentation of vowels. So we're only looking at consonantal skeletons of words, and you can't pronounce words without vowels. All right, vowels are the voice of a language. You know, I think, matter of fact, the word vowel comes from, and the word vocal, voice, vocal, vowel, they all come from the same etymology. So you have to be able to pronounce these words. As a matter of fact, you can't pronounce a consonant without a vowel sound after it. Like even when somebody tries to say a single letter, like when we all learn the English alphabet, the consonants in the English alphabet, we still pronounce those with vowels. Like we'll say B, you know, and P. We don't just go. I don't know if y'all can hear that. Nobody pronounces a P like that. And just that. Like when they go, A B C D E F G, H I A B C D E F G H I J K L M N O. Nobody does that. So you say P, and M. Nobody goes or or n. Nobody pronounces it like that. They go N. They put either an I before the N or an E vowel before the N even when we pronounce the alphabet. So I say all that to say that it was a necessary thing that Egyptologists did, but in doing so, they fully recognized the fact that that was just conventional. And so all of the words that we pronounce this, and and this is mentioned in the book. As I said, this is something that's understood. It's been understood by anybody who takes a look at the language and knows that the historical pronunciations, is a project that's being worked on. And again, in order to actually recover the historical accurate pronunciations, we would have to turn to science, and in this case we would turn to linguistics, and within the different disciplines of linguistics, we would focus on historical comparative linguistics, where we can compare the cognates of living African languages, and then we can see the shape of the vowels in the living languages that are still spoken, and then we can look at the environment that those vowels are found in. And by environment, I'm speaking about the consonants that surround those particular vowels, and we can start developing patterns and leading into sound laws and things like that. All right, but that's a whole scientific endeavor, and that's being worked on. All right, and it's being worked on by African scholars, by the way. And this is another reason why we have to embrace these scholars that are putting in the work. Otherwise, we're going to be so far behind, and then we're going to be doing that which we're saying that we don't do, or that we have a problem with, or that we dislike, which is to rely on these dictionaries and the early Egyptological grammars and things like that. All right, so you can't have it both ways. You can't you can't complain about using the early Egyptologists dictionaries and grammars, but then ignore the new scholarship, or whatever the case is. All right. So, okay, did anybody else have anything for step 3? I mean, we're looking at it, and like I said, step 3 is to group the signs into words, and that's what we're looking at. So we have Netcher, Pu, sTaw, Heru, nF, nRf. Some people may pronounce that F for that R. That will be the first line, and I can switch back and forth from what you're looking at to the picture. So if you see on here, that will cover the first column, and the first column being the one on the far right. So it starts off with the Netcher standard or pole, and then it ends with the horn viper at the bottom. All right. So let me switch back. Anybody else want to chime in on anything that we have on the screen?
No. Well, if people are following along and using the Vigus Dictionary 2015, we had someone put in the chat the first two signs. You put R8 I think, and then A40. So you can find that on page 1691. And then the next word we have is poo. You can find that on 1681.
All right.
Yeah. In case anybody was following along in the dictionary with us or trying to look it up on their own.
All right.
So the next word I have also, it's on 1469. StAw.
Tau.
sTsw. And then the next word we have Heru. That's on page 1025. And for the next word, nF, that's 1100, page 1100 in the 2015 Vegas. So I'm just adding that in just in case people are following along with us.
Okay, I think
Oh, Tiba pulled it up.
pulled up. All right, so good. We see NF right there.
Yeah.
All right. Good enough. All right, now, for time's sake, we obviously we can't go through all of it, word by word and look them up. But what you would do is you would take each of these individual words and you would look them up. Now, in this step 3, there's a two-way, you may have to go through self-correction, because sometimes what you think are grouped together at first, when you go to the dictionaries and you look them up, sometimes you may not find them, or when you do that, you'll find out, oh, I included an extra glyph, and now it makes sense because that glyph wasn't included in this word, but it's included in the next word, and I find that word also. So this process is, you have to be open, and you have to be a little flexible, not a little flexible, a lot flexible. Because sometimes you can assume that these glyphs may be paired up or grouped together to form a word, but then you may be wrong. And like I said, coming from step 3 to 4, within step 3 and step 4, you have to be a little familiar with the grammar as well. So, like for example, this last word on the first row, on the first column, but in our in this instance, it's a row. So we have this raw F here. Now that F there, that horn viper, is an actual suffix pronoun, third person masculine suffix pronoun. So you won't necessarily find that as a single word within the dictionaries, because the dictionary only has the root words there, not the different words with the suffix pronouns and even the different forms of the word in terms of verbal conjugation or words that have been inflected, meaning changed their forms, just to agree with other words. You won't find that in dictionaries. Dictionaries only list, well, I won't say only, but primarily dictionaries will list just the root of these words. Okay, but then some dictionaries will include the most common phrases as well. Like for example, Jed Medew in, you'll find that whole phrase as a single entry within a lot of dictionaries and things like that. So a lot of the common phrases that you see all the time, yes, you will see that, but not necessarily the conjugation, not the inflection, and not the suffix, words with suffix pronouns and things like that on there, unless they're part of a very common phrase. All right, so and and at a beginner's level, the suffix pronouns of things, that's something that you learn. All right, that's included in the beginner's introduction book. You learn the basics about suffix pronouns in general. There's independent pronouns, dependent pronouns, and then you have suffix pronouns. All right, so you do learn what those are, so you'll be able to recognize this. And that's why you see this dot here. The dot is used to separate the word from its affixes. All right, whether it be a prefix, infix, which is rare in Ancient Kemet, and then you have suffixes. All right, so that dot is used to separate that. So that's why you see the dot. If you ever, if you're ever wondering about that. Now, the dot is used by most people, but then some scholars will use an equal sign, okay, to separate. They'll use a dot to separate endings, and then they'll use an equal sign to separate the suffixes. All right, and that gets a little complicated. You'll find that in some, when we have to talk about grammar, that will become, useful, beneficial to kind of make those distinctions. All right, and by ending, I'll give you an example. The feminine T marker that people should be familiar with, the feminine T is an ending. It's not a suffix. So that may be separated by a dot. But then if I have a word that has a feminine word, a feminine noun, but then I want to make it in the possession of someone, or turn it into a possessive, put a possessive suffix on there, then you would separate the feminine T with a dot from the root, and then the suffix pronoun with an equal sign after the feminine T. So you can see how that becomes beneficial to make that distinction. And that's only when you're dealing more so with the grammar. All right. So you look at the word. So did anybody look up any words?
I still have my Vegas open, but I just wanted to address Jehudi, because he was saying, can we show examples? Can we show examples of being flexible within the groupings? And I think with this whole first column, you have to be real flexible, because the words as you see on the papyrus won't exactly match the Vegas dictionary sign for sign.
Okay, here's a good example. If I think I understand what he's asking. Okay, so Natiba, if you could just put your cursor close to after the word shatau, the word Heru. Okay, but as far as the glyphs in the first row, so you have the reed leaf and the eye right there. Yeah. Okay, so you see how you have the reed leaf, the eye, and then you have the open mouth. Now, this is just an example of how you can kind of self-correct. Okay, so now let's just say that was our first tentative grouping. We just wanted to group the reed leaf, the eye, and the mouth. And then we go look it up, and which means that we're going to treat that mummy, that standing mummy right there, by itself. Okay, so that will be the separation. So that will be our first, our first preliminary grouping. So if you go to, so let's look up the mummy by itself. So if you could switch to your Vegas and look up the mummy, I believe it's A25 as far as the sign itself. But if you want to look it up, just as a shortcut, go, let's see if I could, I'll just tell you the page number real quick. Yeah, if you go to page 21. Oh wow, your 21 is different. I don't know if you're using yeah, okay, right there. So now you see the mummy by itself right there where it says Tut, like Tutankhamun, and it means statue, image, figure, likeness. So that's what that word is by itself, and you see the logographic marker, which is telling us that this sign is to be taken as a full word. So if the word is Tut, and it means statue, image, figure, likeness. So now go back to the glyphs. If you switch back to that page. Okay, so now let's say that's what we divided. So now we see tut, and then we have this this papyrus roll and these 3 strokes here. But now let's look up the reed leaf, the eye, and then the mouth, which would be Heru. If you look it up by the word Heru, IRW. Go to next one. I can tell you the page number to make it faster. It's also on. Oh well.
1025.
Okay. Got it. 1025.
Yeah, but that's of the PDF.
Okay, so you see it right there at the you see it at the bottom right there where it says Heru, shape, form, nature. So here we have the reed leaf, the eye, the quail chick, the standing mummy, the papyrus roll, and the 3 strokes all together in that word. So this is what I mean by, you know, preliminary groupings, and you when you doing the detective work by looking this stuff up, now you can see, wow, okay, all of those glyphs are included in this word, as opposed to breaking it up and just looking up the mummy by itself, you know, as you know, somebody can easily assume at first. Okay, so now, but the reason why this is important and it's a good example is, okay, look at the word. That word, it has all of the signs that we're dealing with. So hold on, you can keep your page there. Let me just switch to mine. So we have the in the first column on the right on my screen, you have the reed leaf, the eye, the mouth, the mummy, and then the papyrus roll and 3 strokes under it. So all of those signs are present with the exception of the quail chick. So this is where you have to be flexible as well, because the quail chick is not included in our image, but it's included here in the dictionary. Okay, now go back to page 21 or 22 in yours. Go back to page 22 in the document. Okay. Okay, you must be using Vigus 2012. Oh, 15. Okay, well, scroll up one. Go up one more then. I mean, another page. Okay, why? Okay, yours is different because I don't see the unless you got to scroll up, unless we're not seeing the full page.
Or yeah, maybe he got it zoomed in. You might have to zoom out because what you were looking for might have been on the bottom of the
Yeah,
bottom of
there
the
we go.
page.
Yeah, scroll up. Yeah, there we go. There we go. Okay, yeah, that's it. That's it. So if you scroll up, now, so right there at the bottom, see at the bottom right there, the bottom 2 entries, you have the mummy by itself. At the very bottom entry, you have the mummy, then you have the papyrus roll, and then the 3 strokes, and it means shape or form at the very bottom. And then right above that, you have the mummy quail chick, papyrus roll, and the 3 strokes. So you can see those are the same words. It's just that some glyphs are being omitted. All right. And then we have the 3 mummies together above that, which is Heru as well, shape, form. So all of these mean shape or form, shape or form, shape or form. All of them are nouns. Okay. So this is what you know. This is part of the process. This is part of the detective work. So we're dealing with the same words, but they may be different in the different descriptions that you're dealing with. All right. So so you know, just wanted to kind of answer the question and to show an example. So hopefully that answered the brother's question.
Yeah, because you're going to see the same thing in the word right before that. We had shtAwy, but when you look it up in Vigus, it'll have it with the extra bread loaf. You'll have all the glyphs we see in the picture, but it'll be an extra bread loaf in there. So pretty much with this whole column, we had to be flexible, even with the second word, poo. So.
All right. Okay. So hopefully that answers the brother's question, though. All right. So we saw that Heru, obviously, we looked that up real quick. It means shape or form. So Netcher, we know that it means, well, people translate it as God. It could mean divine or God in the Kemeti sense of God. Keep it like that. And then we have the word shtAw. So was that what you were going to look up? Because we can go ahead and look up, I guess, the first word, or we could spot and just look up a few words. So let's look up shtAw.
In the document, it's on 1469.
All right, page 1469.
Uh, 1469. Is that what he's on?
Yeah, that doesn't look like that would be anywhere near that.
Oh, my bad. Dang. That's what I had written down. I must have wrote it down wrong. But we have N37 X1 N37 X1 G1.
Go to 1446. And 1446 and 1447. So here you start to see, yeah, where you are right there is where you can start to see this word shtAw. And even on the next page, if you go right to the next one, yeah, you'll see shtAw. And then on this particular ones, you'll see that X, the glyph that looks like an X represents, which is Gardner code Z9. But you see shtAw, which means secrets or mysterious secrets or something that's hidden and things like that. All right, so we know the word forms or shape, and then we have the word secret or mysterious or something that's hidden. And then we know that the word Netcher is dealing with the word for divine. The word pu is a demonstrative pronoun for this. So this divine or this God, hidden of forms. And then we would keep on going. But for the sake of time, we're not going to be able to look up every individual word. So let's just pick some words, though. Let's pick a couple of more, though. Let's go to the second row, that first word. Let's look that up. Now, mind you, in step 3, looking up in using the Vigus, there's a tutorial on the website. mdw-nTr.com website. There's a tutorial on how to use Mark Vigus, and in fact, we'll probably do a separate live show just to pick some words and look them up in Vigus, and then just to show the speed, just to show how you can get faster at looking up these different words. All right, and there's different ways that you could look it up. You could look them up by Gardner code string, which are the string of Gardner codes together, like you see on the screen. Where you see the, like for where you have it highlighted. Oh, you just moved it a bit. Yeah, we have S29, T3, I10, N5. That's a Gardner string. You can look it up by Gardner string, or you can look it up by way of The manual decoder is transliteration, and we could do a show to show how that's done, and then show how fast the search results and how to narrow them down really fast. All right, so we could probably do that. Okay, so yeah, you have it highlighted. So that's the word there. It's sahej, which means to brighten.
Atiba, can you zoom in maybe one for the viewers? Yeah, the still show. There you go.
Yeah, you could scroll up and down on the side. Okay, yeah, yep. There it is. So we have sahej, which means to brighten, and that's on page 1883 inside there. So, all right. So that brings us. So that's the first word in the second column. In the second column, that's that first word, to brighten. So what's the next word after brighten? And on your screen we have tAwy. And most of us may know what that means, but in case we don't, let's look. In case someone doesn't, let's look that one up, and then we'll probably pick one more, and that'll be it. So tAwy, and we have those two lands.
Is that 1242? 1240. Oh, okay, you pulled it up already.
Okay, there it is. So can you highlight that one? If you just take your cursor and highlight it. No, I mean like how you have the blue. You have the top one highlighted, but it's actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the sixth one down.
I'm not getting any response. I gotta go out and come back in.
Oh, you mean it froze?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, leave it there for a second, and then, because I just wanted to point out, it's the sixth one down is the word we're talking about. So you see the two strips of land, and then you have the N21 twice right there. Yeah, that's where your cursor is. Yep, that's good enough. So we have tAwy, it means two lands. So okay, if you had to go out and come back, exit out and come back, I mean, do it again, that's fine. I'm gonna switch it back to my screen. So in that second column you have let me put my cursor on. So here in the second column you have sahej, which means to brighten or to cause to be bright, and then tAwy, so brightened the two lands, and then you would keep going on and on and on. All right, so for the sake of time though, let's let's at least do these glyphs right here next to the scarab beetle. All right, I think this is pretty interesting because these glyphs stand out. They stand on their own. They're not within the columns, and they're kind of off somewhere by themselves. Not really by themselves, but different. So on the right-hand side of the beetle, can anybody tell me what that is, or any of those words? Y'all see that?
I can barely see it. Oh, okay.
There we go.
Oh, that's what, how you say, wsir. That's the eye, and under that is the throne. Is that the portable throne? Yeah, I think that's the portable throne.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be wsir.
Okay.
The next one, is that a rope? Looks like a rope.
Okay, and that would be in the gardener section for ropes and cords and all of that. So it'd be in the V, as in Victor. So it'd be in the V, and I believe that is V7.
Okay. So then underneath that might be the water ripple N35.
Yes. Yep.
And then so for V7 for the rope, it's shin. So that might be the phonetic complement right there.
Yeah, most likely. Yeah. And remember,
Yep.
anytime you see something that's not a monoliteral, then most likely those other biliteral triliterals are complemented by a monoliteral. So so either that water ripple can either serve as a complement to the sign above it, or it can be a sign on its own, which will be the preposition to, or they call it a dative, or it could be used to try to deal with past tense. But in this case, it's a phonetic complement. So you have shin, wsir, shin, and
Yeah, the next sign, that's the horned viper.
okay, yep.
Then we go down, that's the star.
Mm-hmm.
And then the T, X20 or X1.
Mm-hmm.
And then under that is the enclosure for yeah, that's the enclosure.
Okay. All right.
So wsir, shin, F, duat. Wsir encloses, or wsir, he encloses the duat.
Yes,
So,
exactly. All right. And the duat, people interpret it as the underworld. Okay, so now let's go to the one on the left. Now, mind you, you read it from left to right, and obviously you did that because of the horned viper facing to the left.
mm-hmm.
So it's the opposite of what these glyphs above are facing. All right, so that was just I want to point that out. Now we're over here on the left hand side. We're here on the left hand side. Anybody have anything to say about this one?
Yeah. The first one, it kind of looks like pet, like the symbol we saw at the top of the whole inscription, transliterated PT for sky.
For this symbol here?
Yeah.
Okay.
So maybe the signs on the top is I know the one on the left is a bread loaf, the X1 bread loaf.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe the first one is the stool. It looks like a circle.
All right, now there's some detective work. So let's go. Okay, let's put a question mark here, but this is.
Oh, or is that the new bowl? Yeah, that's what it is.
Okay, right. See, and then you can figure it out because if it's new ball, then you know it's newt.
Yeah.
Newt. Because I was gonna say, if you move over to the next glyph, you see this seated female. So newt. And then what's this over here on the left of that?
That's a bird. That's the what is it? Is it the what bird is that? The swallow? I know it's transliterated WR.
Mm-hmm.
And it'd be in the G section.
Mm-hmm. And then we have the R, or the mouth representing the R, so the phonetic complement were.
So great newt. Or
Mm-hmm. The great.
yeah.
The the great newt, the big newt, not big in the size, but the great, what's the other words? Anything synonymous with great, things like that. All right, so now with those two things known, now if we look at the picture, I guess gotta zoom out a little bit. Now that we look at this picture here, remember we have this pet symbol up here, which is the sky, and we have two people hanging from it. So on this side we see that this is the great newt. Then over here we see wsir, you know, encircling the duat. His circle is the duat. So now we can look at this picture and tell what's going on here. So this person hanging from here, which is a female, because we have to, now we don't see here, it's kind of messed up to see if there's any indication of female as far as like breast that we normally see depicted. So it's kind of damaged right there, but we can see the dress of a female. All right, clear. So this is Nut here hanging from the sky, and then we have wsir right here, whose body is bent, which means it's in a encircling fashion. So he's encircling the duat. All right, so this is, you know, a representation of this encircling the duat. And then we have the scarab here, and then other figures here that are not named. You know, they're not named above their heads or anything like that. So the only two that are named are these two figures here, hanging. And we see the scarab, and then we see the what looks like a sun disk in front of the scarab. All right, then we have a boat, and then this figure here. Now this figure is not named, but you know, we can take a very, very good educated guess on who this is. And usually how you even do that, even these figures here, they're not named, right? And then, you know, if we went through translating this entire inscription, it's possible that their names are included in here. Like we see Kepler here. Now I'm not sure if this is Kepler identifying Kepler as Kepler, or Kepler being used as a word, you know, as a verb to come into being, or you know, anything like that in terms of actually identifying the figure. But even if they're not named in here, what you would do is you would look for inscriptions that have the same imagery. And you know, there's a lot of the same common themes all throughout Kemet, from upper to lower, different eras of time, and so on and so forth. You know, like within the solar bark, you'll find Ra in the form of a ram. In a lot of different places, you'll find Ra accompanied in a boat, not with Kepler right here, but it'll be Ra and a ram under a shrine that's encircled by a serpent, and then he'll be accompanied by figures. You know, so there's certain figures that will usually accompany or be within these boats. You know, whether it's the depending on which particular boat you have, the day boat and the night boat, and so on. So it just depends. But that's how you would start troubleshooting. It's like troubleshooting. It's like detective work. If you wanted to figure this out, you do a lot of comparisons. All right. But knowing that, we know that this figure here is Nun, holding up the bark. And Kepler is not named, but it's obvious here. This last one is a falcon. Now, you know, there's several different falcon nHrw, so specifically you wouldn't know which one, but you definitely know that it's one of the falcon nHrw. And the rest, they don't have any specific thing that could, you know, make distinctions and things like that. All right, so you know, I think that's it for you know, tonight. Now, you know, I know people may watch this and they want to know, well, what does it say? What does it say? So, you know, let's kind of give say what it says. I'm going to check in with the YouTube chat. Was there any questions? No, not really. He said it just takes work. Well, you know, like I said, as far as time, we don't have time to look up every single word. But the gist of this, did anybody go through further along and translate anything? Because I don't want to.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go ahead and speak on it. If you're speaking, I can't hear you.
Yeah. So what y'all want me to just run through it or go line by line or?
Oh, well, I mean, for time's sake, well, yeah, if you want to just say translate line for line, that's fine. Or you can just go through it. I'll follow you with my cursor since I think my screen is still up. My screen is still the focus. Yeah. Because I know, see, I want to point out something. Um, Sometimes it's difficult to go line for line when doing the translation,
Yeah.
only because, you know, the column separations are not necessarily separations of complete sentences or even words. Sometimes a single word may be broken at the end of one column and beginning at another column and things like that. So, with
Dang, Damo found the whole picture. That's fly.
oh, what he has it up.
No,
Yeah.
That's the one Chris had put in the group.
Oh, I didn't get that one. But it has the pet going all the way across the sky symbol.
Right, right. That's what I was saying. It goes across.
Yeah, I guess we can get start from the first column.
Okay, go ahead. I mean, yeah, you could just read it through because if you I know how you have to jump the columns. Go ahead.
Yeah. This divinity, hidden the forms, his mouth is purified with incense. Illuminating the two lands and his brilliance, you take Asar Inhay justified. And that's the deceased woman who owned this papyrus. In your arms, leading in the divine land, and his sundisk navigating on praises, giving sweltering winds to his limits. O Ra, within his egg, it shines. And right after that, that's actually it's damage. You can't really see what's after that. You have this in the eastern sky against the manifestation of the earth. He created them in the netherworld darkness against the entrance of his fish into Anu. Existing offspring rebel on the temple of Ma'ati, of Geb, of Asar. The netherworld divides the Ashed tree. Nobles of Ra, in respect to his name, of the cat who averts his enemies twice, by Asar, singer of Amen, Inhay justified.
Okay, all right. So, yeah, we wouldn't have had time to actually look up every single word in real time. So, we may want to include that in the link and everything, and we could probably number the columns and make this available so that people will know um, what matches with what and everything like that. So that's good. So that's excellent. And I hope those who tune in now and who will be tuning in can learn from it. So I'll just open the floor for any comments, discussions before we close out. Any questions from the YouTube family? I see we have a couple of people tuned in that's new. Nasir, Hotep, and Brother Aziz. So any other comments, questions, concerns, issues, arguments, anything?
No, I don't know who
Are we all
picked this.
still alive? tAwy.
But this is a good picture. I'm glad we did it. You know, we've been working with a lot with the papyrus of Annie, so it was nice to work with someone else's papyrus, and it was a sister. So
Mm-hmm.
so just get familiar. And thanks for reading that translation. That was nice.
Yep. Excellent. And for those who want to know what this is from, like you said, it's a papyrus of, they say, usually some people pronounce it Anhay, and they would get confused with this particular one when they read the title with Ani, because it's kind of spelled the same but except with an H and an A, Anhay or Anhai or Anhai, so it sounds like Annie. Um, and this would be, within the Peret and Heru. All right. Now this is a unique image, because a lot of the well, not a lot, but most of the other Peret and Heru will not have this in it. Really, the only other place that you'll find this particular imagery would be on the coffin of Seti the First. I believe it's at the foot of Seti the First where you have a similar image where it's more detailed. Actually, the image is more detailed. All right, so so anybody listening and tuning in want to check those two out, you can compare the two. All right, so one we have it in the papyrus, so-called Book of the Dead, or Peret and Heru, and the other one we have on the coffin. All right, same image. Yep. So, and matter of fact, let me switch over to the fuller picture that Damo is sharing. So here you can see that this is the entire sheet basically, and by sheet, or Egyptologists, when they found these different papyri, in order to handle them safely without them being brittled and crumbling up and things like that, they had to actually damage it by cutting it. They cut them into sheets, so they would number the sheets. So I'm not particularly sure which sheet this is, but this is the full image of a particular sheet, I believe. And so we have both sides of it, and in the middle we have the mummy of Anhay or Anhay, and then we have two ram-headed Netcher. Then we have these 2, 4, 6, 8 circles there. Something I wanted to point out, though, I think we didn't mention. Let me go back to my screen real quick. And it kind of speaks to what I mentioned early when we first started. And like I said, there's, in the bigger scheme of things, when you want to learn something about Kemet, in a bigger scale, there's 3 levels. And I'm just describing as 3 levels. 3 levels having 3 stages within it. Okay? And as I mentioned before, level 1, stage 1, is a beginner's level where all of the foundational information is conveyed and learned, and you get it, in your system. You have to lay that solid foundation. Without a solid foundation, anything you build on top of it will fall. All right? We're very familiar with that, and with all the metaphors with building a house on sand and all of that. So we understand that. Stage 2 of level 1 is learning more detailed about grammar. All right, we have to know the grammar, because grammar is the set of rules that governs the language. Okay, and grammar deals with morphology and syntax, and some people may call it morphosyntax instead of grammar itself. But grammar deals with both morphology and syntax. Okay, and basically what that's saying is syntax deals with the external arrangement of words, word order, and things like that, whereas morphology deals with the internal arrangement of words, dealing with morphemes, how words are formed, how they change to pair up with other words or to relate to other words and things like that. All right, so that's grammar, and that would be stage 2. Stage 3 is to learn a little bit more about linguistics and especially a focus on historical comparative linguistics. Okay, so even after you learn all of that, that will just equip you with all of the tools needed to read the inscriptions. You could basically go through inscriptions, and depending on how proficient you become through practice, you'll be able to do it fast. You'll be able to just look at like the one we have on the screen. You'll be able to look at it and just read it. But now, in order to know what the reality is behind what you're reading, what is really meant, what's really going on, what's meant in the minds of the ancient image, the ancient Egyptians, then that's where level 2 comes into play. Stage 1, 2, and 3 of level 2, where you start to work and develop skills in determining the realities behind what you're reading. And this will obviously you have to do a lot of time with unlocking figurative language. And with figurative language, not just for the sake of figurative language, but you have to be anchored in the culture. And this is where the stage 3 of level 1 will come into play, because now you have to do comparisons with living African traditions, because Kemet is very African. The traditions, rituals, and things like that are very African. Okay, so it's because of this skill level at stage 3 of level 1, which will be a further study into comparative linguistics, that will allow you to have insight on recovering or discovering the realities behind the different texts that you can read. All right, so again, that whole level 1, stage 1, 2, and 3 of level 1 will just provide you the tools that allow you to read this stuff accurately. You know, you can read it. Now we can read it. We know what all the signs are. We know what all the words are. We know how to look it up and all of that. But then you have to go further, and that's where stage 3 of level 1 will bring you over up to level 2 in determining the realities behind these things. You know, we're having the proper interpretation. Then from there, level 3 of this bigger picture will be then to apply information, if it can be applied. This is when you determine, you know, can I apply this information in my life personally, in my family's life, in my community's life? Is it beneficial for social change? Is it beneficial for, you know, all of that kind of stuff? You know, this is where that would be come into play. All right, and that's where you would have institutions. That's where, you know, you set up different what I should say, teaching tools to actually put together systems of learning, because now you have all of the pieces of the puzzle. All right, so I just wanted to reiterate that this stuff that we're doing here is still scratching the surface. There's a lot more to learn, a lot more to do, a lot more to practice, and Asar. So I was great ended, but hey, we have Brother Asar Inhay who chimed in. And I don't know if you've listened to the show or what we've been talking about, but if you had, you know, if you wanted to kind of chime in and have something to discuss, then we can extend it.
Peace, can you hear me?
Yeah, you sound a little far from the mic, but we can hear you. I can hear you.
I don't know what's up with that, but no, I didn't. Unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to view the show, so I'm actually just coming in from riding my bike out in the neighborhood, getting some exercise. So I missed the show, and so I'm just catching the whatever you just said. That's what I caught when I got in. So I don't know the nature of what y'all were talking about tonight. So I just planned on just peeping in for the rest of the show, but I guess y'all are done already. So, but yeah.
Okay, well, since you're here though, I was gonna close out, but hey, since you're here, first of all, I know you're gonna, breaking in a new bike. I saw you your bike was stolen. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, but since you're here though, so what I was just going through, well, what we did, on Wednesdays we basically we just show the method. We show the method of transliterating and translating. So we use this particular picture that you see on my screen, and we demonstrated the different steps of transliterating and translating. But of course, in 2 hours time, we can't go, so far into the details of it. But I guess when you came in, what I was saying is in the bigger picture of studying Kemet and the traditions to beyond the commercial and the romanticizing of Kemet and stuff like that. I was just giving a like an overview of the breakup of how of the steps in the total steps of learning about Kemet. And so I was breaking it up into 3 different levels, and within each of those 3 levels, in each level there's 3 stages. So like I was saying, in a very beginning standpoint, from level 1, stage 1 is where you just lay a solid foundation. You learn about the language, because we're working off of the assumption that uh, culture and tradition is transmitted by way of the language. Language is being the DNA of culture, et cetera, et cetera. So level 1, stage 1 is to learn the foundation of all this stuff. So basically, that's what we're dealing with, and that's what the classes that I've been doing, and the book is about laying that solid foundation. So you learn about the different glyphs, how they can function. You learn about classifiers, determinatives, ideograms, phonograms, logograms, and the rebus principle, all those kinds of things, and a little bit of the basic grammar. Then stage 2 of level 1 is where you focus on the grammar, and I was emphasizing the importance of grammar because grammar deals with morphology and syntax, which governs, the language, or any particular language. The grammar governs that whatever particular language. And so now we can construct and we can see how sentences are formed, word order, how inflection happens with individual words, and so on. That's stage 2. Then I was saying the next step in the progress would be to dive into linguistics, where you you start you gain the knowledge and competency of linguistics, and how especially historical comparative linguistics, where you can then begin to compare um, Egyptian with living African languages, and know how all of that stuff is done, and, the procedures and the science behind it. Now, taking all those 3 stages of level 1, then you can use all of that to start to recover the interpretation. We can start reinterpreting what we actually can read now. We don't have to rely on your early Egyptological text and things like that. Now we can read it for ourselves, and now we can start to reinterpret it in the context of Africa, the African paradigm, being African centered and so on and so forth. So that would be level 2, all 3 of those stages, where you start to recover and utilize those tools. And then I was saying in level 3, the top level, 3 stages of that will be, going through all the different things on what to apply. Can we use it? Because we're dealing with a 5,000, I guess depending on who you talk to, between 5 and 10,000 year old civilization. Here we are in 2016. Even though we can read everything, even though we recovered the accurate realities behind this stuff, how much of it is usable? How much of it can we apply? And so on and so forth, and then we can actually do it, not just figuring it out, because that's what we do in level 2. But so level 3, actually becoming, we can choose to, become that, or live these different realities, whatever's useful, whatever's applicable. So anyway, that's where I think that's where you came in. I was just going over that. So while you're here, I know your I guess trade, or something that you're excellent in, is dealing with the historical comparative linguistics, or linguistics in general. So I know I mentioned that in level 1, stage 3. So maybe, I I guess for the people who are gonna watch the archive or people watching now, maybe you can kind of give like a summary of what is historical comparative linguistics or something like that. I know it's
All
a
right.
question, but you know, you can break it down.
All righty. Well, historical comparative linguistics simply is the science of the study of language with the focus on reconstructing the parent language of languages that are demonstrated to be related historically. What do we mean by that? Just as a point of analogy and as a reference, it is like, for example, you have two parents, and your two parents get together after they had dated for a while and then got married. So we're going to act like this is traditional. So they started dating a while and got married and decided to have some children. By basic understanding of DNA, the children will inherit genetic and phenotypic characteristics of the two parents, meaning there's going to be some transfer of genetic material from the parents to their offspring. And it is the same with the parents before them. So their parents passed on half of, in terms of each side, genetic material, which came to make their children, which became the parents of a new generation of offspring. Now, it is not an exact replica. They do not divide like cells and you get an exact replication. You get certain exact replications in terms of features, in terms of genetics, but there's something slightly different that gives each child their unique characteristics. Something may change. But when we look at their genetic profile, whatever it is we're looking at, we can tell if they are closely related to each other and a particular parent by, again, examination of the genetic material. So, by analogy, we have a similar process in languages, because in reality, often languages follow that same process, but not in a strict sense, but more so because of it involves human beings and human cultures. And human beings do have children, and just as they pass on their genetic material, which in many cases help to shape their phenotypic characteristics, they also pass on their language. And just as there are mutations and different variations in the gene makeup of the physical bodies, there are slight differentiations in the language as it is passed on from generation to generation. Now, just as with when two parents have children, sometimes those children will move off to far off places and start a new family. As a result, again, they start dating some people and they get married and then they have children. And the cycle repeats for several generations. Now, let's assume that our hypothetical parents had 3 children. And these 3 children moved off to separate locations, and for some reason they were cut off from each other and could not communicate. They would, on a physical level, inherit certain biological traits that they would, of course, pass on to their children. But they're also with the languages as well. However, when groups and populations start to live further and further apart, dialects begin to form. So the way that people say the same language is different. And so as a result of that, over time, it may be harder for these language groups, because now they're separated between time and space. We're now dealing with, let's say, 4, 5, 6 generations more, let's say 10 generations or whatnot, in 3 different directions. And so these groups have not been communicating with each other. And so their dialects are not mutually intelligible. And what we mean by that is, even though it sounds a little different, we still understand it. So, for example, anybody who probably lives in California or New York or whatnot will go to a place like New Orleans, Louisiana. They still speak English, but they have a different way of speaking the English. But we can still understand them and have a conversation with them. In certain places in Jamaica, you can still have conversations with groups of people, even though their language is different, but we can understand the words and things of that nature. But there are other parts now that are just, for the most part, totally incomprehensible to us, although they are technically speaking English. And so if we further divide, or separate it over time, this certain aspect of Jamaican patois will, just no longer be understood, and it will have to be considered another language. And so, saying all of that to say, as historical comparative linguists, what we do is examine a group of languages to trace back their origins. And when we trace back their origins, we're involved in a process called reconstructing. Because the original language, just more likely the original grandparent, no longer exists. The old language is now the new languages that are spread in different regions and spoken by different populations of people. So we're able to line these languages up and compare complete paradigms and work our way backwards to reconstruct the parent and demonstrate scientifically and systematically that these languages are related. And as a result, we can give a certain aspect of history that helps us to trace population movements, but also we can reconstruct to a certain extent the parent culture and psychology that its remnants survives in the daughter languages. So I hope I was clear in explaining what that is.
Yeah, definitely. And that's good because, as I said in my earlier breakdown of, it's just a tentative view of this entire learning process. And I was saying, level 1, stage 3, we'll have to deal with historical comparative linguistics, because we would need that the tools and that science in order to recover and discover the accurate interpretations. And I know you've done some work with reinterpreting different Egyptian themes or Kemetic themes based on the tools of historical comparative linguistics. So, like for example, I know you've done work on what was a recent thing? I forgot which one. You made a picture out of it to show the relationship between the Hogan, I believe it was the Hogan priest.
Correct.
Maybe you could just kind of mention, say something about that.
Okay, in brief, There is a word in the ancient Egyptian lexicon that we transliterate as capital H, Q capital A, lowercase q capital A, or is it K capital A?
It's usually a hiccup Q with the Q.
Yeah, because there's two of them. There's one with a K, because one deals with speech, and then the one I'm speaking of deals with kingship or rulership.
The Q.
Someone who's in a leadership authority, over a population, a chief, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
So, in Egyptology speak, we say Heka. But it is a triconsonantal root, meaning that there are three consonants. And so we have an H consonant, a rounded K consonant, and an R consonant. And so it's more a nasalized R consonant to be exact. So it's something to the nature of like Hokere, something, we're just making up sounds, pronunciations right now, but just to give you a more rough pronunciation so you can better understand where I'm coming from here. And so when doing the comparative linguistics and we're looking across the Sahel belt, we notice that this word exists in living African traditions, and that term is still applied to the leaders in these respective regions. So whereas in ancient Egypt you had the Hekar, whatever, amongst the Yoruba people of Nigeria, they have actually two variations of this word, which is one is called the Oni, which is a name for the king, but the other variation, the one that's more closer to the ancient Egyptian variation, is Ogboni. And the Q sound in ancient Egyptian corresponds to a simultaneously articulated G and B sound. So kind of like how we say Geb, try to pronounce Geb without the E in between the G and the B. You pronounce both of those sounds at the same time. So it's Ogboni. And there's no H sound in the Yoruba. If you find a word with an H in it, it is a loan. All words that are successfully compared and deemed cognates with in the ancient Egyptian with the Yoruba, where there is an H or an H-type sound in the ancient Egyptian language, it is rendered zero or null in the Yoruba language, so it doesn't exist. So instead of saying Hogboni, it's simply Ogboni because the H is dropped. And this now refers, strictly speaking, to a fraternity of elders who, in traditional Yoruba society, helped to govern the society and was an aid to the king. Now, this same word associated with leadership exists amongst the Dogon, and it's called Hogan. Now, the Dogon don't have kings like we think of kings. It is simply the most senior elder is the one who helps to govern each polity. And so that senior elder, which a king, that's all a king really is in the first place, is simply the senior elder. Even though the king may not literally be the oldest in the society, he represents the senior elder, actually the founding elder of the community. And so in each one of these respective languages, that same term exists. And so when we see the same term exist in these respective languages, let's say that the ancient Egyptians, for the most part, did not explain the roles and functions of, the Heka or Heka. In order for us to get a better understanding of that role and its functions and possible pronunciations and things of that nature, we look to ancient Egypt's related languages, who retain these cultural features and the words that are attached to these cultural features in the same or similar manner as we find in ancient Egypt. So we're not saying, or I'm not saying, that it is always a direct one-to-one correspondence, because as times change, words can have different applications. So whereas in ancient Egypt, it stands for the ruler, the king, it is now strictly regulated amongst the Yoruba to the senior fraternity of elders. But as we can see, because we know the historical context, it's still applied in the same or similar manner.
Mm-hmm.
Except in one tradition, it is, relegated to the king or chief, whereas now in the Yoruba, it's a whole body of kings or chiefs, simply known as the elders.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is, in a nutshell, how we're able to, closely examine these relationships, again, by way of the historical comparative method. And so, there's a whole scientific process in that process itself in terms of historical comparative linguistics, which is really kind of hard to explain verbally, so I'm trying to avoid it. But just understand that historical comparative linguistics is a process, a series of experimentations that allow for us to eliminate certain hypotheses and reaffirm certain hypotheses, in terms of, the relationship between certain languages.
Well, yeah, see, that's a perfect example. So thanks for that, because that's exactly what I'm speaking to. When I say that level 1, you got the stage 1, beginner, stage 2, intermediate, which is grammar, stage 3, linguistics. That's linguistics in and of itself, like a historical comparative method, like learning the method itself, the science itself. And then bumping up to level 2 is where you use all of those things that you learned in doing what you just described. So level 2, stage 1, 2, and 3 will be going through and doing the comparative work and doing the comparison, doing the experimentation, doing the processing that you described, to come to some accurate understanding. Then, like I said, level 3 is actually applying it. But while you were talking about the word hikar or hika in terms of ruler, yeah, what came to my mind is the name of Tutankhamun. And Tutankhamun's full name, one of his epithets is Hika-Inu, or Anu, the city of Heliopolis. So it comes to mind that, if, now we know Tutankhamun was fairly young, in terms of age, but we don't know, that age you were pretty much, calling shots and doing things, depending on what you were responsible for. But it seems like it would indicate that there was a fraternal order of the same thing you were talking about, because this Hika in particular, because there was more than one. There was Hika Anu, or Anu Shemau, which is the upper Anu. Then you have the lower Anu, and it was there was a ruler, words that associate with ruler, ruler of that. So it kind of separates these two regions, and it makes it seem like there was different fraternal orders or different fraternities possibly, dealing with that, at least by the time of Tutankhamun's lifetime. I believe was the 18th dynasty. So that just came to my mind. I'm not, that's something to look into, whatever the case is. But yeah, so I mean, anybody else have any comments? I know everybody else had the mic muted, but you know, if you got any comments, questions, or whatever, open the mic up. But like I said, I'm MC Iron Lung, and you know, I know I'm a talker, and I know Asar can talk. So,
Well, I just wanted to make note that this is plate 8 from her papyrus, and in her papyrus she's also called Asar, and also this is from the 20th dynasty.
okay, yeah, that's good. See, that's a good point too, because women, as we find with Nefertari or Neferet, Iri, she's also called an wsir, and then like you just said, this particular individual is called wsir. So that, you know, that kind of drives the point home that men and women were called wsir, and it's obviously for particular reasons and things. So maybe, you know, and like, you know, and then even discovering that or recovering or getting an accurate understanding of that, even that. Why is the deceased called wsir? You know, whether they're male or female and things like that. So all this ties into place. So it, you know, it's a lot to learn. There's a lot to do, and you know, we need to advance the body of knowledge, and that's what's being done. And sorry, you said you didn't tune into the show, but at the beginning of the show, I did make mention of the fact that you know, a lot of times we see people. Well, I had made mention of there's a very small amount of people who feel that the hieroglyphs are not deciphered or, you know, untranslated and things like that. But then aside from that, we also have people who do believe that they're translated and deciphered, but yet they feel that all of our learning is limited to early Egyptologists or European Egyptologists. And so I made a point to bring up the fact that African scholars are putting in a lot of work, but a lot of their work is being neglected. You know, in some part because the literature is written in French or, you know, their mother tongue across the continent, but also because of the stigma that African scholars are somehow biased and somehow, you know, unscientific, and just because they're African or so-called quote-unquote black, that they just do things haphazardly to oppose European or white scholarship and so on and so forth. So I made that point earlier about that, but there's a lot of work that's being done with the African scholarships. So I know that you are familiar with a lot of African scholarships. In fact, you introduced a lot of African scholars, especially in terms of linguistics or the subject of Kemet, to the social community. I know I've learned of some scholars, you know, by way of your introduction and everything. But I don't know if you want to comment on the neglect or you know, the kind of I guess basket that people are pushing, or I guess the damage. What damage does that do to the advancement of the body of knowledge when people do those kinds of things?
Yeah, I mean, you hit on a lot of issues, and then, you know, some of those issues have unique historical precedences in terms of how they came about. And so, for example, you know, when it comes to the deciphering of the ancient Egyptian language, we have to remember at this time that African people are going through certain struggles simply for freedom. And, you know, to be worried about the decipherment of the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs was far from, you know, on their minds at this particular time. And so, you know, as a result of colonialism, we were not necessarily engaged in that academic process. And so Europeans have led that charge in the effort to restore access to the ancient Egyptian language and the writing script in particular. So, but of course, as a result of that, you know, they have opened the way. However, due to cultural biases, due to just belonging to different cultures that are far removed from the psyche of the ancient Egyptians, not only in terms of time and space, but in terms of its inner logic, that they may have opened the way. However, there was still much more work to be done in terms of the pronunciation of words, because they came in with the notion that ancient Egyptian is closely related to Semitic, and they view the Semites as quasi-Europeans, and thus, they have been focused on that. And so you have that issue in of itself. Then you have another group of individuals who are typically, African, of more recent historical African descent, I should say, who argue that, it's impossible to decipher the language, and only by way of some kind of initiation can you gain access to the deeper aspects of the culture and language. And so they go around promoting this initiation. However, not one of these groups are initiated by descendants of actual ancient Egyptians. And so any kind of interpretation that they would have would be faulty. And they, 9 times out of 10, can't read the language. And so even though you get initiated into these groups, you still don't have any more access to the language than what the Europeans gave them in the first place. And you can tell by their way of pronouncing ancient Egyptian words. It's no different than how they do in Egyptology. And so, and lastly, for those who, just simply argue, not even on an initiatic level, that it hasn't been deciphered, you would have to explain, this is why it's important for have to have some working knowledge. I'm not saying you have to be an expert, but just some working knowledge of basic linguistics and its theoretical assumptions. And I gave you a theoretical assumption, earlier in our discussion as it regards the relationship between languages, that they're related because they descend from a common ancestor. And so when you understand this aspect of historical linguistics, diachronic linguistics, as we say, then you will understand why it's silly for them to say that it hasn't been deciphered, because whatever our schema is to transliterate and define the words, we find hundreds, if not thousands, of examples of these same words in living African languages. So you would expect, if the Egyptologists were just making up stuff, that you would not consistently and very systematically find the same words with the same meanings as the Egyptologists have assumed for the ancient Egyptian words. And so it's just incumbent upon us as serious students of just African culture in general, that we do all things in excellence, and that we demonstrate, we look to show and prove for ourselves, and bypass those who can't demonstrate their particular arguments, for or against a concept in ancient Egypt and in Africa in general.
Yeah, well, I had kind of spoke on that at the beginning, of our discussion, because, that kind of resurfaced here and there in terms of the decipherment. And, my opinion of that, when I look at it as a whole, I feel that it's those kinds of claims are generally used as scapegoats to, or excuses as scapegoats, so that people don't have to study it, because this studying African cultures in general, especially when it comes to Kemet, it's it's time consuming. It's hard work. It takes dedication. You got to put in some hours. Like you said, we got to do all things in excellence. We got to apply rigor to it. You can't microwave Kemet at all. And so I think a lot of these claims that have come up like that, they come up from time to time whenever it gets hot. Whenever it, overall there's a demand for us to know either how to read the glyphs or to know what something means. Whenever it gets real hot on that, then I see this claim resurface. Oh, the language has not been deciphered anyway. It would be that or excuse two. Oh, well, that's just Europeans' interpretation. All y'all learning from European grammars and European books and this and that. So I see those as excuses. But and that's what called me to give the outline I gave earlier about level 1, level 2, level 3, and then the stages within those levels. Because if people visualize and see what I'm saying, then they'll see that this entire process is going to totally eliminate all those excuses. Even one that you brought up that I didn't mention was you got the groups that will say, okay, well, we got the information. You have to join our initiatic group, and then you get to details of the language and this and that. But you come find out, like you said, they pronouncing things just like Egyptology speak, and they're using the same dictionaries and everything like that. So this process that I described will even eliminate that, or I won't say eliminate. It will allow us to be better, like you said, do all things in excellence. So it will allow us to just advance the body of knowledge to where we could set all that stuff to the side. So I hope people understand what I described and kind of feel me on it. At least, and I'm just describing it that way. Nothing's concrete in place, or it's not some plan of Wujao. I'm just describing our progressive learning steps in the bigger picture. But I don't, anybody else have any comments on the panel? Everybody else got their mics muted. I know it's late. Sleep is for the weak. Sleep is for the weak. And you're dealing with MC Iron Lung and what they call you, DJ I Don't Take a Breath. That's that's a song with Joe, DJ I Don't Take a Breath. But anybody have any questions or comments, anything?
No, I just wanted to show appreciation for Asar coming in here and dropping that science on us. It's appreciated. Thanks.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't get on the importance of the African scholars. Just briefly, it is incumbent that let me just deal with this from just a good scholastic standpoint, not only simply because they are African. Just good scholarship requires us to do a proper literature review and to examine, all works that deal with the subject in which we're interested. So by just good scholastic standards, if there are works by competent folks on the continent that address a particular situation, a particular subject matter that we're studying, it is incumbent upon you to try your best to get access to that information and to study it thoroughly as you would any other information. And so that you have a more complete body of resources to make a more informed analysis of the subject in which you're studying. This is just basic good scholarship in terms of literature review. Before you can get a PhD or master's degree, the people who sign off on your dissertation, they want to know if you have a thorough knowledge of the subject and the authors who came before you who have written on the subject. The reason why is, as scholars, see, a scholar is somebody who, in an academic sense, is somebody who adds value and insight to a subject. They progress the forward movement of our analysis of a particular subject. They bring about new information and new insights. And the only way that you can do that is if you actually review what has already been done. And so it is less compelling as a scholar for one to simply repeat what somebody has already addressed and brought about in terms of their historical work. And so, you know, the job of the scholar who holds a master's or a PhD is to advance the field. And the only way, again, that you can advance it is to know exactly what came before you. And so this is the basics of doing proper scholarship. And it is no different, you know, for us in the communiversity. You know, and what happens is that you have a lot of scholars who, for their own biased reasons, choose to dismiss these African scholars because they're coming to conclusions that are drastically different than what is mainstream in their particular circles. And then what often happens is, because people build their careers off of certain conclusion and analyses. And so when somebody from outside of one's field or, you know, outside of one's school of thought comes and challenges those tightly held assumptions, you know, this could result in, you know, a loss of prestige, you know, because now your ideas are outdated. And so there's a natural resistance to the accepting of new information. And so what a lot of these Egyptologists and linguists and whatnot will do was simply mischaracterize people's work without having read it or misreading it. You know, and you know there's advantages on both sides and disadvantages on both sides. And when I say both sides, I'm speaking of the dominant European, often Eurocentric point of view, and then the African school, you know, which we call the Ethiopian school, you know, in that ilk. So the mainstream, you know, again, due to colonialism and slavery, they have amassed a lot of wealth that they can conduct excavations and things of that nature. They can publish journals and have them widespread. They have physical institutions, you know, and grant money and access to, you know, funding that people of the African school do not have because of colonialism. You know, we get the inverse effect of the colonialism. So because they have the funding and that they can spread their message out more powerfully than the African school, you know, people take that as, well, they're out here, they make the most noise, so their analysis must be true. However, when we're talking about ancient Egypt in particular, ancient Egypt is an African civilization. Its languages, I should say, are related to other languages deep in Africa. And deep in Africa, quote unquote, sub-Saharan Africa, you know, is where the parent language and culture derives. And so you have a lot of scholars who come out of those sister and cousin languages and cultures from the same locations from where the original parents gave birth to these particular languages. And so the Africans actually have an advantage on the cultural and linguistic front because they live the tradition. I was explaining earlier to a sister who I'm going to be building her website. Me and her converse a lot on, just African culture and spirituality, quite often. And, one of the things I had to explain to her is that, when people are challenging the relationship between ancient Egypt and the rest of Black Africa, they always, for some reason, want to say, well, where are Africa's pyramids? And where are Africa's large temples and their graffiti writing and things of that nature? Not understanding Africa at all. Reason being is because what you see in ancient Egypt, as far as what survives in the artwork and the written script, is a living tradition amongst the people of Africa. They live the hieroglyphs. You see the psychology and everything in their actions, in their rituals. It's not something that they had to necessarily write down. When you go into Central Africa, there's no need to build temples because the forests are the original temples, which the ancient Egyptians, because they no longer lived in a forest environment, but still had some level of ancestral memory, had to create temples to replicate what they, ancestrally remember in the forest. And so it takes a more critical eye and analysis to be able to do this type of comparative work and to see in the living traditions what was written down in ancient Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is what the African school helps to illuminate, is the living survivals of what we see as ancient Egyptian, because you can now, at this point, you can no longer call it ancient Egyptian, because the ancient Egyptians are simply expressing the culture which was already laid down in the parent cultures, which still survives amongst other of ancient Egypt's cousins and kin. And so now it is Pan-African psychology. It's a Pan-African behavior in things in which we're examining and finding out. And so this is why it's important to see this work. And so even if you don't necessarily subscribe to the notion that we are directly related to the ancient Egyptians, it wouldn't matter, because the same ideas, the same psychology, the same rituals exist amongst the exact people that from which African Americans came from directly within the past 500 years due to colonialism and slavery.
Mm-hmm.
And so we don't have to go far at all to understand these concepts. We can go directly home. Like in the same conversation with the sister, I'm gearing up to do a lecture, or do a presentation hopefully for the StAW conference here in Philadelphia that they have every year in October, dealing with ma'at and how ma'at was a social system. And what I'm going to demonstrate is how ma'at, not simply as a concept, but in terms of the language, the word itself and its social application, still survives in Central Africa amongst the Baluba, amongst the Kikongo speakers, and amongst the Bassa in Cameroon.
Mm-hmm.
It's a living, it's there. You literally call it, the dialectical equivalent. Remember what I said earlier, when people spread over time and the languages are no longer intelligible, they go through their own changes in terms of pronunciations. So while it may sound different over here, they are still the same word with the same or similar meaning. And I'm finding these type of examples everywhere across Africa. But it is in Central Africa, South Africa, where I'm finding the strongest evidence for many of the ancient, the concepts that we find in ancient Egypt, and that allow us to make stronger interpretations, of course, alongside the primary resources, because you can never neglect primary resources when doing this work. in ancient Egypt. And so I hate to be long-winded, but that's that.
Now that was good. And while you were saying that, that reminds me of a saying, the phrase hidden in plain sight. And when you said that what's written on the walls and the Medew or the hieroglyphs on the walls and things like that, it's because of our paradigm. We're looking to the walls for to study something as opposed to live it. And if you're living it, then it can become hidden in plain sight, meaning that people are living this stuff right in front of you, but we're looking for it to be written. We're looking for ma'at to be written somewhere as opposed to actually staring ma'at right in the face by the behavior and the structure of these social uh, um, communities and things that are there. So that's what kind of brought that to mind. But
Ooh, if I could say something real quick,
yeah,
that, related to what you just said. People often always are also looking for the goddesses and gods of ancient Egypt in the same way that we would find it there. So like if we have Ma'at, they're looking for the goddess Ma'at, sitting in some kind of yoga position with feathers as her arms are spread in these other places. And it won't be like that. It will just simply be Ma'at as a cultural idea and social system, without the deification. And so you can't always look for the same expression amongst these cultures. Whereas one culture may deify and personify it for educational purposes, others will demystify it. And it's just an everyday, ordinary concept without it being, religious in nature. So just wanted to say that.
yeah, that's the same. That's it. And basically, you know, we are what we express. We are what we behave like. And to accurately describe something, names are supposed to be reflections of an attribute or attributes or characteristics or the nature of something. And the only way that we can tell these things is by how something behaves, how something acts, how something reacts, and this and that. So so ma'at will be the expression of the people, like you said. So looking for a female with a slim dress on, with some feathers, a feather headband, and then some feathers on her arms and stuff. It becomes a little silly to look for that iconic expression, all across the continent. So
Here's a good example of what I mean. Matter of fact, we don't have to go far from this. Now, a cognate for the word ma'at in English, there's actually a cognate. It's just simply the word right. Like when you say there's a right and a wrong way to do something, the word right is cognate with the word ma'at. You actually don't pronounce ma'at correctly, but that's another topic. It's more closely pronounced something like merakit. And the root of ma'at is an RK value. The M is a prefix of abstraction that was fossilized, and then as a result of that fossilization, when it came into the lexicon of ancient Egypt, the written ancient Egyptian, they added a T suffix, which works pretty much the same. And so it has a prefix and a suffix. M, RKT is the consonant skeleton. And so when it comes into English, the M prefix of abstraction is dropped. And so that K sound is voiced and becomes a G. And we no longer in English pronounce the G, even though we write it. But we pronounce the G in other forms of the word. And so that same root in right, even though we no longer pronounce the G, it is in the same word in terms of regulate. That REG, regulate, has that root still.
Regular, regular.
Regal. What are some other words? There's Rex, but that's more Latin. But it survives in English. And so when you tell your children that they better do right, technically, you're saying to them that you must do ma'at. It's the same word. However, in English, it is not personified. You will not find amongst us English-speaking people this goddess with wings in a yoga position with a feather on her head. You're not going to find it. It is simply a part of the normal lexicon here. So when you say ma'at and you say the word right, which is also in righteousness, right doing, you're saying the exact word ma'at. It's not, is no difference in meaning. It has survived in this form in the English language.
Yeah, that's a good example. That's an example right at home. That's good. I wanted to I mean, like I said, you know, sleep is for the weak. We can keep on going, but I just want to emphasize something you said earlier about the prejudices of the scholarship you mentioned earlier. And I recently saw this video. Matter of fact, the brother had well, actually, I saw this some time ago, but not this particular video. But it's a I'm not sure what her title would be, but her name is Julia Galiff, and I forgot what her title and everything would be. But anyway, she deals with rationale and reasoning. She has the scholastic credentials. I think she has a PhD in something in statistics, I believe, or some masters in statistics. But she deals with rationality and reasoning, and all the things that study with that. But anyway, she did a presentation on the question of why you think you're right even if you're wrong. And in there she talks about the perspective, and she groups two different mindsets. She calls one mindset the warrior mindset, and then another mindset the scout mindset. And she gives the analogy of a battlefield where you have the soldiers or warriors, and then you have the scouts. And so in her analogy, the warriors or the soldiers are bullheaded. They're stubborn. They want to defeat the opponent by any means necessary. So even if they're wrong, they have to go through with the motion, and so on and so forth. But she said the scout, on the other hand, is a person that whose sole job is to look at the terrain, take an accurate assessment of the opposition, the opponent, the terrain, any obstacles are in the way, and this and that. When you do recon, in a battle. So a scout's job is to be as accurate and objective as possible, because you have to actually describe really what's there. So she gave that analogy, and then she gave a real story about some historical person named Dreyfus, who got charged with treason or spying. I forgot which country, and how he got convicted, and he wasn't a spy at all. It was only because his handwriting looked close to the handwriting of someone who was doing espionage or something like that. But despite experts looking at his handwriting saying it's not the same and this and that, because the prosecuting people were, as she described, has this warrior mindset, and they just wanted to prosecute. They had to punish someone, that they just basically ran him through and convicted him. And then this guy comes later. I forgot his name, but he comes along later and reopens the case. I think his name was Picard. He comes later and eventually exonerates the guy, Dreyfus. And she said that he exonerated him by asking a very fundamental question. He said, "What if we're wrong?" That simple question turned into the inquisition or the inquiry into other possibilities. So she described him as a scout, and then the other prosecutor as the soldier mentality. So I bring that up because based on what you were saying earlier, this is what I'm seeing in the social community, all over, where people will just almost pull a cart before the horse, where they'll come up with a conclusion, and then they'll go out and look for anything that backs up their conclusion, as opposed to, like how you said, you have to do more objective literature review. You have to know the pros and cons of the issue. You have to know what was written before, whether it agrees with you or disagrees with you, and so on and so forth. So that's more of a scout mentality. But I think that her analogy and her presentation is a really good example that I would suggest people look at, watch just to see, because that analogy is real. She gives the thing about rational thinking and why people feel like they're right even when they're wrong, and this is something that I see, in our community. You say, communiversity or social community. And I see that happening with the African scholars. So for example, dealing with linguistics and African scholars, there is a warrior mentality dealing with the language phyla. So you have the major African language phyla that was created, and maintained and made popular by Greensburg and so on and so forth. But here you have the scouts now in Africa saying, wait a minute, what if they're wrong? And now, based on the question, they're putting together a method and tightening down the screws on different methods, developing superior methods to actually test that question. What if they're wrong? And actually putting forth the work and doing it. And this is what we see. So we have this soldier mentality, warrior mentality, that's still pushing certain things despite the evidence. And then you have the scout that's being more more accurate, giving a more accurate assessment of what they're looking at. So I see that in what we're dealing with. I just wanted to kind of point that out there. I'm gonna post a link later, but another brother had posted it up earlier and brought my attention to it. But it's a female. Her name is Julia Galiff, who's into this, and she actually does lectures along the lines of Neil deGrasse Tyson and Richard Dawkins and Bill Nye the Science Guy, and things like that. So it's something interesting for people to watch.
All right.
But anyway, now we've definitely gone into overtime, and I see we have actually more viewers. Still viewers watching, but hey, it's 12:43. I say sleepers for the week, but I gotta take in consideration everybody else. On the panel. Anybody on the panel has anything to say, June?
Yeah. I'm far from sleep. I'm over here on the West Coast. But I wanted to ask Asar a question. He was talking about how mAa survived into our language and as right. With the word, like we say, tep for head, would that be cognate with like top? How we say top and tip?
Yep.
Okay, yeah. I was just making sure.
There's a whole bunch of English, so-called English words and Indo-European words that are African in origin. And it comes via two ways. There are some that are direct borrowings from African languages, especially ancient Egypt. And then there are others that are inherited that came through a different process. And so what we're coming to discover and believe is that Indo-European derives from a process of polygenesis. Typically in linguistics, when we speak about inheritance from a common ancestor, even though I use the physical analogy of having two parents, because that's what is necessary in the physical world, to give birth to a daughter or a son or whatnot. In language, it is typically understood as one parent. But there are those cases where it is actually multiple parents who converge in a given geographical location. And over time, these languages begin to converge on one another and sound similar, and they share features, and there's a lot of linguistic borrowing. And as a result of some reason that these people start to become one community, a new language family, historically speaking, is given birth. And this is the situation in ancient Egypt, amongst Indo-Europeans. So I'm with the school. I'm kind of in both schools, because in Indo-European studies, there's a phenomenon called Urhamat, the German word basically for motherland. And so we use it in the sense of the origin place of a given language. So there's a debate, an ongoing debate on where Indo-Europeans started. And so did it start, around the Black Sea or the Caspian Sea, towards near the Caucasus? Or did it start in Mesopotamia? And it may be a case of they're both right, but not in the same way. And so it appears as if Mesopotamia was the origin, and then there was a migration from there of this group that became the substratum for the formal formulation of what became Indo-European. And so there's Indo-European scholars that understand that Indo-European is not the end-all be-all, that there is detectable an underlying set of languages that was existing in that place. And again, there was a second convergence process. So what I argue is that in Mesopotamia was the initial convergence process, and then due to further migrations with people that were already there who were coming from in Inner Asia and Russia, and some coming from India via that route, that they converged in near the Caucasus, and this becomes the formal birth of Indo-European, at least in its second stage. And so what that means is that you're going to find a lot of inherited words from these original substratums. And so one of those substratums is, what we call the Negro-Egyptian, coming from the Negro-Egyptian language family. So a group of Africans left out of Africa and moved into the quote-unquote Middle East, some settling in the Levant, some moving further up into what is now called Mesopotamia, Turkey, all of that area. And on that convergence ground, and those two convergence grounds, comes two major language families, the Semitic and the Indo-European. But there were, in both scenarios, there were already people there, of course, speaking other languages. And so they converged, people start marrying one another, languages, interchange, and then out comes, these language families. So what I argue is that these languages derive as a result of a polygenetic process. And this is one of the reasons why you see a lot of words that survive in Indo-European that are cognate with words in Africa, but morphologically are not explained by Indo-European. And so, like when we say the word kaput, or capit, or capital, the CPT, and I'm not talking about the hood group out of the West Coast with Snoop Dogg and all in terms of CPT, or I should say, what's his name, MC8 and all of them, in terms of Compton. The CPT root, the C having the K sound, It's an African word for head. And what it hides is the T suffix, which was used for body parts. So it is the KP is the root, and T is the suffix that is fossilized. So that's why we say, capit or capital, meaning head. Like, Washington, D.C. is the capital of the United States. It is the head. It literally means head. That K sound in the beginning was palatalized in other languages. And so from KI or KE, it was palatalized to TI or TE. And so that same word, without the T suffix for body parts, is where we get top or tip from, and head in ancient Egyptian, which is also survives in Indo-European as the word for top, tip, and things which I just mentioned in English. So you have different variations of the same word, because of this polygenetic process. And so I hope I'm making sense without being too super long.
Yeah, definitely. June, that was hopefully
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. He explained it very well, Dua. I appreciate that. I'm interested in finding other words now.
Well, there are a few, what should I say? If you have my book, or if you get my book in the near future, Where is the Love? How language can reorient us back towards love's purpose. That is, in essence, the focus of the book, or at least a major component of the book. Because what I argue is that the word love in English is found in African languages. It is an African word and African concept, what we mean by love. And I'm not talking about simply the concepts existing. I mean the very word love. The very word love exists in ancient Egypt. Matter of fact, the word love in English, L-O-V-E, derives from a Proto-Indo-European variant, L-E-U, and an aspirated B sound as in boy, but an aspiration means that it's a breathy H following it. So from the BH sound, over time, we started pronouncing it with a V as in Victor. And so in ancient Egyptian, it is given as what we would transliterate as capital capital A and lowercase b.
yeah.
And there's an inverse to that word. You should know that the, it is an inverse to the word. And the B and the M sounds interchange in Egyptian. And so in my latest work, I give some other citations for people who've noticed this interchange as well, including Obinga, including Mboli, and I don't know if Alan, has made that notice as well. But the B and the M sounds interchange. This is important because they're inverse in syllables. So this is a different dialect or language that existed in ancient Egypt who contributed this variant of the same word into the lexicon. And so when we say MR, as in love, it is the exact same word. So understand, remember what I said earlier, that what we transliterate as capital A, which is the vulture sign, it is really a nasalized uvular trill, which is an R type of sound. So you have basically the root is RB, which is LB in Indo-European. But R's and L's interchange often in many world languages. So you have the inverse of the same word, just now with the M grade, nasal grade. Was what we say nasal grade when when we talk about the M and N sounds, or those are nasal sounds. And so now the syllabic inverse of it. So we have the Kikwe, if we familiar with in Bodhi's work. We have the Kikwe version, which is the love, or Reb or Rub or Ribi or whatnot. And then you have the Kweki version, which is the MR variant. And that's the most dominant in ancient Egypt, is the MR variant. And so that also survives in Indo-European and the Latin languages. So when you say amore, that is the same words that you find in ancient Egypt for the word love. And so in that process, in the Where's the Love book, of course, I'm trying to make that argument. So I have to do my due diligence in terms of comparing words in Indo-European and with the African languages. So you'll see a series of words that you find in English that are originally African words and that you can find in ancient Egypt. For example, the word black. And I should say that the word love, we transliterate it in two different ways. I use the German school of transliteration, which means that I use the J grapheme for the I. And so I'm going to use the German transliteration when I'm transliterating this variation of the word love. It is J, capital A, B. Just in case those who are writing it down or just, viewing the podcast later, the visual cast later. And then the second variation is capital A, B, and then J. Now you can substitute the J for I if you're used to transliterating with that I, graphing. And so the word means to desire, wish for, to love, to long for, to covet. And so, but anyway, like I said earlier, the word black survives in ancient Egyptian, but it's used in a different semantic context, because the word black can refer to white and darkness. And how is that possible? Because the word black originally originates from a word meaning fire. And so on one semantic leg, it went fire, burn, black. In another semantic process, it went fire, light, and then white. And so we get two variations of the same word in English. We have black, as in the color black, or a very dark color. And then we have black in its palatalized form, we pronounce as bleach. And bleach turns things white. And so, there's tons of words in English that are really African words that we can trace with some level of ease.
All right, well, hey, you said a mouthful right there, and I know it's getting late. Well, it's been late, so I'm gonna wrap it up. We definitely went extended, but it's all good. It's really good. Hopefully, those who are watching the archive will definitely benefit from the entire show. We start off with the one demonstrating, different steps with that inscription of was it? You said, Chris, you said it was sheet 8 of the papyrus of Anhay or Anhi, not to be mistaken for the papyrus of Annie. It's the female Anhay, as they pronounce her name. This of the 20th dynasty, Peret and Heru of Anhay, sheet 8, which is chapter 125 of the so-called Book of the Dead, where you'll have, what they call the negative confessions or the declarations of innocence. This is like a, what do you call that? The particular picture we used was something that you find in this particular papyrus and also on the tomb, on the coffin of Seti the First, but you won't find it in any other Peret and Heru. So it has a uniqueness to it. And it talks about wsir being circumscribing the Amduat. All right, so we went through that, and then um, kind of just had a little chat, and now brother Asar joined us and gave us a lot of insight on the science, on the linguistic process. And actually, you actually came in right on time, because when you came in, I was talking about this bigger picture of this learning process, and I made mention of the comparative method and why it's important to learn it, because we'll need those tools to uncover the realities behind the figurative language, because a lot of Africans across the continent, oral or written, is done in figurative language, what we call figurative language today, with metaphors, allegories, symbolisms, and all this kinds of things. So anyway, but I'd like to close out. If anybody has any last statements, floor is open, and then we'll just close it out.
Yeah, I wanted to once again say thanks to Asar for joining us. Thanks to all our viewers. We appreciate the support. Hope you guys get something out of the video. We included the transliteration and translation in the description, so if you have time, watch the video over, check our work. If you guys have any questions, hit us up in the Facebook group, and also check out Asar's website, asar-nHotep.com, to get his book that he mentioned, or any other of his work. So that's all I had. Hotep.
All right, anybody else? Okay, well, yeah, appreciate you coming through, hanging out, Sar, and I know that yeah, and on the topic of linguistics, um, I kind of look forward to doing another hangout or demonstration dealing with linguistics and things, kind of settle a couple of the issues that are floating around, so I look forward to that. Um,
Yeah, we got to do that, because there's more questions I wanted to ask, but I know it's a long video and it's getting late. But yeah, we do need to do that.
Yeah, and see, overall, I think linguistics as a scientific study or discipline, or several disciplines, I think we take language for granted in general, because it's one of those things that we naturally inherit as human beings, because when we're born, or even when we're in the womb of our mothers, we don't remember it, but we're hearing people talk, around us, and then when we're born, people are talking to us, whether we call it baby talk or not, but people are gesturing, talking to us, and then we learn how to talk. We learn grammar even before formally learning grammar. We learn how to construct words and put words together, because we mimic, and because that happens so naturally and just so fluid, that I think we take language for granted. So when it comes to really being specific with language, people kind of tend to overlook a lot of things, or gloss over things, generalize a lot of things, and because of that, a lot of mistakes are made, a lot of false assumptions are made, and things like that. So I hope to do future presentations, or Sar, if you do for future presentation, to kind of bring that, to kind of anchor linguistics back down to the ground. Let people know that no, this is a a science, just like astrophysics, just like chemistry. Linguistics has a color of DNA, biogenetics. Like you made the analogy of human biological relationships, but language has the same kind of phenomenon, like you described. So how we test languages, I mean we test people relatedness based on their DNA, then you test languages based on their DNA. But obviously, you're not going to look at a person physically and say they're related just because they look like each other, or this baby looks like you, so therefore you're the father. Imagine, what's that show?
Mary Poppins.
Yeah, Maury Povich, and instead of him, opening the envelope of a DNA test, he's just looking at a camera, side by side shot, and saying, "Okay, Rodney, you are the father because you have the same eye." That wouldn't that wouldn't go over. But that's what people are doing with languages. But instead of the lookalike for physical traits, they're using topological arguments and etymological arguments instead of genetics. But I hope we can get together and do a presentation to kind of explain that, or if you can explain that further in detail to lay a couple of those things that are floating around to rest. So look forward to that. But anyway, I want to close out, and I'll say Shemem Hotep to everyone. Again, Shemem Hotep is to depart was a farewell greeting, as we say, to depart with peace, roughly. Say ETM Hotep when we welcome in someone, and then Shemem Hotep when we leave them. And I also say Xrt-nTr, which is good night. So again, Shemem Hotep.